listening to Radio Sputnik. Telling the untold.
Fault lines.
Live from the divided states of America, it is now time for another edition of the most disruptive show in our universe, covering news and events across our divided states as well as across the fractured surface of our globe. In the independent corner, I am your political analyst, Shane Stranahan.
And in the left corner, I am the indefatigable, a burning ember in the darkness, your political analyst, Jamarl Thomas.
And together we are Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. In the headlines this morning, first up in COVID news, at least 3,626 new coronavirus deaths and over 200,000 new cases were reported in the United States yesterday. Over the past week, there has been an average of 183,000 cases per day, a decrease of 11% from the average 2 weeks earlier. But I can't help but wonder personally if this slowdown is partly due to the holidays and the fact that, some of the clinics that would be administering these tests, et cetera, will be shut down. Things are probably slowed down on the back end. That's just a guess, but hopefully I'm wrong because, you want to see less cases. You want to see less spread. But anyway, in other COVID news, state health officials in Colorado announced Tuesday they had identified America's first confirmed case of a fast-spreading COVID-19 variant first identified in the United Kingdom. Colorado officials said the case had been identified by the state's public health laboratory in a male in his 20s with quote-unquote no travel history. That indicates community spread. And if this new faster spreading variant is actually much faster spreading, then that community spread will soon become a wildfire. That's disheartening, to say the least. Britain, speaking of which, on Wednesday became the first country in the world to approve a coronavirus vaccine developed by Oxford University and AstraZeneca. Britain has ordered 100 million doses of the vaccine. Back in the U.S., a recently elected U.S. lawmaker, Republican Luke Letlow, 41 years old, has died from COVID-19. He was elected as representative for Louisiana's 5th District and was due to be sworn in on Sunday. But he announced his positive coronavirus test on December 18th, was admitted to the hospital on the 19th, and put into the ICU on the 23rd, and finally died yesterday on the 29th. Yesterday, Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell blocked an attempt by Senate Minority Leader Chuck Schumer to unanimously approve a House-passed bill to increase direct payments in the coronavirus relief package to $2,000 from $600. The Kentucky Republican later in the day introduced a bill that would boost the size of the checks to $2,000 from $600, but would also repeal Section 230 legal liability protections for internet platforms and create a commission to study election issues. The bill would meet all of President Donald Trump's recent demands, but it's unlikely to get the Democrats' approval. Jamarl, what's your take on this one?
Well, the Section 230 thing, they're not going to go with that. I mean, that radically alters the internet, and it radically does it basically for these kind of, the stuff that Donald Trump is saying. It doesn't fix the issue, getting rid of Article 230. I mean, basically, Republicans want more information out because they want to be able to basically lie flagrantly. I mean, keep in mind, all of this is based on Trump and Trump's inability to lie to people. I don't like them saying I'm lying, but you are lying. Yeah, but I don't like them saying it, so I want to get rid of Article 230, Section 230. Yeah, I mean, Democrats are not going to go for that. Democrats want more censorship. Meaning they want to restrict more information. Whereas Republicans are like, we want people to be able to lie more. Democrats are like, we want people to be able to tell the truth less. And so I have a hard time believing they're going to go for that.
I hear what you're saying on that one. And I mean, a repeal of Section 230 would sort of create a gaping void in liability law on the internet. And so what you'd probably get pretty soon after is some new status quo that's defined either by the passing of some new ruling or, the passing of some new law that explicitly stipulates how it's supposed to be done, and what exact liability they have, what role these companies have.
Passing Congress?
No.
Exactly. That's my
no,
point.
and it would probably be a ruling.
Yeah,
it would probably be a ruling in the time being, and then at some point you'd get a law.
Congress is broken, and so it's like for them to pass something like this kind of on the fly, there's nothing backing it up. Nobody knows what's on the other side of that. And I don't believe for a moment that Congress has the ability to pass some kind of rule or law to explain it and come to some kind of agreement on it. I don't buy it. I mean, I don't buy Congress' ability to do that. And that's sad. That's so sad because that's their job.
It is, yeah, no, and that's probably, what would probably happen is some judge, would make a ruling and something would go up to the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court would make a decision, and, opinion pieces around the United States would either lament that decision or celebrate it, depending on how closely it adhered to their political preferences. And then at some point, years from now, Congress might get around to ruling on it, but to passing a law on it. But I get what you're saying. No, it's not going to happen now. But I mean, in my own way, I completely side with the Republicans on this one. Repealing Section 230 is one thing, but the wanting people to be able to say what the heck they want to without having their information suppressed and literally having their messages blocked. It's like if you had imagine in 1820, if you had a national letter reading service that manually read all of your mail and just, I don't like that you're saying that, and you had people who would sort of intercede, they would step in and they would just take your letter out of the mailing service. They literally wouldn't let you send it to people. That's kind of the equivalent of what happened with Hunter Biden. With the Hunter Biden New York Post story, where people's Facebook messages were actually being prevented from being sent to each other. It's just crazy, man.
Yeah, but would Section 230 fix that? Do you see what I mean? Both of those things are somewhat different. Like, I get your point. Because clearly I disagree with them blocking the Hunter Biden story also. But that wasn't a Section 230 issue. That was, I guess they could use that as a fig leaf for it. But yeah, that was real news that they just blocked. Like getting,
in a weird way, I mean,
if they give rid of Section 230, for example, what happens afterwards? Meaning from the standpoint of the internet and from the standpoint of Twitter, Facebook, Google, all that stuff. Because the fact of the matter is the Hunter Biden story should have been let out. And that was seemingly the fig leaf that they were using for it, the 230. But that wasn't the impetus for it, if that makes sense. They would have always found some reason to try to get rid of it. I'm saying I don't know what is on the other side of Section 230 from the standpoint of how the internet looks, meaning Facebook, Twitter, et cetera, et cetera. And until they give me some kind of understanding of what that looks like, I am somewhat against them just willy-nilly removing that. But even though I do get the issue, like both of those things are true to me, if that makes sense.
I hear you. I hear you completely. And right now, I mean, of course, right now the status quo is that the company's being prevented. They basically can't be sued for the content that users post onto their websites. But as far as I can tell, sharing that news story wasn't against the law. It's not like what law would they have been held liable for breaking? Exactly. I mean, I'm sure that there are some that have been passed recently, but I don't know.
No,
what law would they be held liable for?
They just chose.
Yeah,
they chose.
Yeah, they chose because they've come under intense pressure from Congress. I mean, here's the thing: is that the tech companies, people roast them all the time, and admittedly they do some shady stuff, and they're complicit in it. But they're also doing it partly because Congress is constantly pressuring them to do it, specifically the Democrats in Congress. And if they don't do it, then they're going to face an antitrust lawsuit that much faster. So you're kind of damned if you do, damned if you don't. Either you corrupt yourself and you lose users and you lose your moral core, or you get broken up and replaced by some other company that does all those things faster.
Well, wait a minute. Anyway. Wait a minute. Back when Hillary Clinton was running, and she was running against Trump, do you remember where Google would hide her email stuff? Like if you put in like Clinton email, it wouldn't show up. What's his name?
Yes.
The video of this.
Yes.
That was before all of the attacks on the tech companies. That was before all of the pressure on the tech companies. Is it possible?
Was it before the pressure though?
Yeah.
I don't think it was before the pressure.
If you remember when Clinton lost, that's when Democrats went hysterical over this stuff. Is it possible that some of these tech companies just agree or just dislike Trump? Meaning there was no push on Google at that point. Google made a choice. I guess I'm saying, is it possible that the
I will
people
tell
who are
you.
ahead of these tech companies just in line with democratic thought, more so, as opposed to Republicans? I could be wrong, but it just, if Google went that far to do that, it seems like they had a clear
I will
bias.
tell you I have personal sort of, I have my own little anecdotal evidence, which is when I lived in the Bay Area, I remember hearing from a venture capitalist out there specifically that that tech companies would basically go along at a certain point with what political influence wanted them to do because they were worried about some big antitrust pressure coming from Congress if they didn't. And so that's why you saw, and certain companies would fight it to some extent, you know, especially the slightly less powerful ones. But pardon me, the slightly more powerful ones, but they would pretty much inevitably go along with what various interests wanted, whether those are intelligence agencies or whether those are, you know, strong coalitions in Congress who are pressuring them for things. And yeah, no, there's totally some affinity. If you look back at Google, Eric Schmidt, who retains a large minority ownership of Google and obviously still has outsized influence and has since gone and sort of moved into the military intelligence space himself. Eric Schmidt, definitely pro-Hillary, definitely pushing for Hillary at the time. And you can assume that, you know, if there's some influence there, they might have tried to swing the election, at least on margins. And that was a pretty big margin to swing it on. So you can totally see that. But at the same time, there's influence in more ways than one. But
I mean, I feel you. I think I get where you're coming from. Are you there?
Yeah.
Sound like I heard something go, but like with a little Skype bubble. But keep going if you're there.
let's just go back into headlines here.
Yeah.
In national U.S. news, a new court filing has revealed that outgoing U.S. Vice President Mike Pence has refused to support an initiative led by lawmaker Louis Gohmert to avert the certification of Joe Biden's victory in the presidential election. In the new lawsuit against Pence filed on Tuesday, the plaintiffs said they tried to resolve the issue without litigation. You know what, Jamarl, can you take over? Actually, I'm getting some shaky internet problems.
Yeah, I mean, it's because it sounded like something was a little weird, and I couldn't necessarily tell where that was coming from. So that's cool. Let's see. We are right here. Mr. McConnell, a new court filing revealed that Mike Pence. Here we are. A new court filing has revealed that outgoing U.S. Vice President Mike Pence has refused to support an initiative led by lawmaker Louis Gohmert to avert the certification of Joe Biden's victory in the presidential election. In the new lawsuit against Pence, filed on Tuesday, the plaintiffs said they tried to resolve the issue without litigation by reaching out to Pence, but failed to enlist his support. Had Pence agreed to join the effort, he would have been able to prevent Congress from counting the pro-Biden votes of electors in such states as Arizona and Pennsylvania. As it is, under the 1887 law, Vice President's role at the upcoming Congress meeting to certify the President-elect's victory is merely ceremonial. The Louisville Metro Police Department has moved to fire 2 officers involved in a fatal shooting of Breonna Taylor in her apartment earlier this year. Officer Miles Cosgrove and Detective Joshua Janus were both notified of termination Tuesday. A ballistic analysis revealed or determined that Cosgrove fired a shot that killed Taylor. James was not present at the shooting but prepared the search warrant for Taylor's apartment. Former U.S. Ambassador to the United Nations Nikki Haley took to Twitter on Tuesday to express her opinion about socialism and the Joe Biden administration. She tweeted, quote, "Liberal elites have been conquered by the, quote, unquote, woke, but conquered by the woke. They demand freedom, but want to silence and control anyone who disagrees with them. They demand equality, but want to build a new society based on discrimination. They are set on using the full force of government to achieve their vision. The left is forcing its anti-American worldview in the classrooms. It's taking over corporate boardrooms, pushing businesses to make decisions based on politics and not what's best for consumers and communities. Big tech is censoring conservative voices and forcing its leftist views on society. With Biden as president, we should all be worried about the woke left. They will stifle free speech in the name of freedom and enact discriminatory policies in pursuit of equality, and do it with a vision that is no resemblance to the America we know and love. There's some truth in that. There's some lies in that. And the reality of it is, the freedom for one is like freedom for who to do what. The freedom that you give to, let's say, a tech company or one of these other things is a constraint of your own. So I get where Nikki Haley is coming from on this. Like I said, some of it is true, some of it is not. We can get into a good conversation on it. But those are your headlines. You're listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. So let's do this. Let's go into the break. We'll come back with the soapbox segment. This is Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. We'll be back in a moment.
Fault Lines.
So Sean, what do you want to talk about today?
Well, Bob, that's easy. I want to talk about the need to stop the development of self-driving cars.
Again, Sean, you're driving me nuts. I think the self-driving car thing's already out of the gate.
No. It's never too late. See, now the leading experts in the field, just pick one, whichever one, leading experts have repeatedly warned us about the dangers of artificial intelligence. Look, I'm telling you, man, we have to stop the robots by any means necessary.
I see what you did there.
Yep.
Tune into our show By Any Means Necessary daily from 2 to 4 p.m. Eastern Time on Radio Sputnik. And don't forget to call in at 3:20 p.m. to our studio number 202-521-1320.
And if you miss us live, check us out on SputnikNews.com, Spreaker, iTunes, iHeartRadio, Spotify, or wherever you listen to podcasts, and stay up to date on the latest political, social, and economic movements shaping the world around us.
Fault Lines.
Welcome back to Fault Lines on Radio Sputnik. My name is Jamarl Thomas. I'm joined by my co-host Shane Stranahan, coming to you live out of our station in Washington, D.C. If you guys live in the area, you can catch us on radio at 105.5 FM and 1390 AM. We're also in Kansas City at 102.9 FM and 104.7 FM. If you guys are digging what Shane and I are putting down, whatever platform you're consuming this content on, give us a like and definitely share that audio and video. Also, subscribe. If you're join in, or if you want to join in on the conversation, you can send us a chat, a tweet, and of course, you can reach us by phone at 202-521-1320. That is 202-521-1320. Your engagement makes this show what it is, so definitely don't be shy. Last night, something profound was taking place. And on my channel, I pointed and say people should watch this. Definitely lefties, definitely people who believe in the force of the vote, independents, just in general, people should watch. In the Senate, Bernie Sanders went to war for America. And he did it basically holding the Senate up that wanted to go home and go on vacation and basically leave while America basically get this fig leaf of a bill. Sanders said no. Basically, the politics of this is pretty fascinating, and the public should pay attention to it because it's the premise, it's the underlying reason to why something like a force to vote, and for that matter, why a party that actually believed in things would look fundamentally different in this fight, even with a Republican Party that looks the way the Republican Party is. Sanders pushed Trump to sign the bill. Trump signed the bill. The House of Representatives was shamed into a position where they allowed $2,000 to go through, because the moment the President of the United States starts screaming at you and points out all of these things that you care about more than American workers, meaning instead of having this bill to be basically and specific to American workers and to the retail shops that closed and to the Americans that were burned over the course of the bad faith negotiations over those months, it should have been about them. It wasn't. They were shamed. So what happens? A $2,000 bill that probably couldn't pass, once the focus and spotlight was put around it, and you ask the individual congressman, hey, Do you believe that the American worker, after being beaten and broken for all of this time, after being let go belly up during the 2008 crash, while all of this money was lavished out to Wall Street and the oligarchs, are you okay with not bailing out the American worker in this moment? Is the American worker, is the American in general, not worthy enough, not eligible to receive this money? Do you not care about them? Put it to the person to a vote. That vote, America is paying attention to. And that vote is going to be direct material aid to the American worker, to Americans in general. And those Americans are going to know that that guy specifically said, I don't believe that Americans are worthy of this $2,000, despite the fact that across the globe, those governments paid attention and gave attentiveness to their populations. We shut down all of these businesses. We sent all of these people home. And the people that we sent home were people at the hardest end of the spectrum. 42% of the United States before COVID hit was only making $18,000 a year or less. What do those people look like after COVID? What were the jobs that were lost after COVID? And you're telling me that your Congress can't be bothered to attend to the needs of Americans that have basically fallen off of a cliff, weren't rescued back in 2008, weren't rescued in any of this. The wages of the upper 1% goes up stratospheric, whereas everybody else basically stays flat. And in this moment, you can't help. So put it to the test and ask a bill or provision that couldn't get the light of day all of a sudden passes with Democrats and Republican vote, because none of them want to be in the crosshairs of an opponent running against them saying, you were against giving people $2,000. The point is that this deals with the material concerns of Americans. The point is that you've put members of Congress on the spot. The point is that any opposition that is going to run against one of those members of Congress, if they said no, that red circle is going to be drawn around it, and that is going to be used as an attack point. Look at the Republicans now, Loeffler and whatever, Perdue. You think those Republicans would back $2,000 under normal circumstances? No. Do they back it now? Yes. Yes. What is Mitch McConnell doing in the Senate? Mitch McConnell doesn't want his people to have to take a vote that he knows his people don't want to take. The leader in the House, in the Senate, is basically trying to prevent his people from taking a difficult vote. If his people take that vote, and if those people turn around and say, no, I am not going to give Americans $2,000. This is very specific. This is not a bill that has all of this other stuff in it, where the American public is not entirely understanding what's going on, is not entirely sure, and there's a positive, and no. Very straightforward. Do you believe Americans should get $2,000? My point is that because this is directly related to Americans, it is difficult to turn it down. It's the politics of this that is beautiful. Mitch McConnell is trying to avoid giving his people that vote. Sanders is trying to force him to do just that. What is Sanders using to do this? If you remember, President Trump vetoed the National Defense Authorization Act. Now that is the bill with the UAP stuff. That is the bill with the UFO stuff. So in the normal circumstances where I'm actually against these military budgets, in this very specific instance, I have a very selfish reason for the very least wanting that part to go through. Trump vetoes. Now Trump doesn't veto because he's opposed to the amount of money that's spent, $740 billion. Oh, he doesn't care about that. And if you remember, Congress passed that without pretty much any debate. That's good. Appropriate the funds for it. 10 times as much as our next people. No debate, or barely little debate, very little thought, automatic. Sanders says fine. The president vetoed it. The House has overrode the veto. If the Senate wants to override the veto, if you want to have that conversation, then we need to have the conversation about the 2,000. And that's the war that's in the Senate. Sanders gets up and gives this amazing speech about the American worker, about how the Americans have been beaten, about how all of this and how we've given so much attention to the 1%, and yet we haven't done this for the American worker. No, It is time for us to pay attention to America and recognize that the Americans have taken a hit. Everyday Americans that make the society run, make the society go, have taken a hit. If you want to override that veto, you will put the 2,000 up for a vote. That Sanders knows that Republicans are going to have all sorts of pressure on them to vote for it if it comes up, meaning it could potentially pass, just so they don't have to deal with this from the standpoint of people using this in opposition to the various members of Congress. Mitch McConnell was against this. Guess who else was against this? There's another spineless Democrat, Dick Durbin. Durbin gets up and basically makes an argument that says there's a lot of good stuff in this bill. The military bases are going to be renamed, and we need to get the money to Ukraine, and we need to get the money to this and that. And, you know, I want to go home. It's the New Year's. We don't work this much during New Year's. That spineless Democrat. And the sad part about this is you missed the point. You have all of these people who are struggling. Maybe a quarter of the country fell off of a cliff. A quarter of a country that was pretty much already falling down off of that cliff and just basically got hit worse. Sanders is literally fighting for those people to get additional funds. Schumer backed Sanders on this for obvious reasons. Durbin to come out and bravely make this argument that I don't care about the $2,000 that American workers can get. I want my vacation. And military bases, we need to rename those, and it's important that they're not named Confederate names. Does Durbin realize that they have been named Confederate names for the last, 40 years or more, 50 years or more? Does he believe that change justifies not backing and fighting for America to get $2,000? Are you insane? But this is what you have for opposition. These are the people you have that are being voted for by lefties and progressives, and that you expect to somehow hold the line. This goes back to the welfare queen stuff. The Republicans, in part, are right about this, but they were wrong. It was the wrong target. The welfare queens are the Democrats that sit in Congress from unconditional support from African Americans that are terrified of Republicans, and progressives that are just as terrified of Republicans and too cowardly to fight for what they believe in. This is what you get. People like Durbin. And until you get to the point where that support is no longer unconditional, you will continue to get spineless Democrats like Durbin standing up here fighting against the best interests of America because he wants to go home. Shane, what do you think about this? I don't know if you've seen the clip of Durbin standing up there. I didn't see the clip this morning. It was like a few minutes after the cutoff for putting in clips. Otherwise, I would have shown it. But it's pathetic. It's pathetic.
I haven't seen that. That sounds embarrassing. Yeah, I mean, okay, so here's another wider take. We had Mark Frost on, who was talking yesterday about how he thought $2,000 wasn't nearly enough. What you needed was something more like $24,000. You needed full wage replacement for the period here in relief, effectively for folks who lost their jobs due to decisions that the government made. Thanks for sending that clip. I'll watch that. I agree with that. That's one take. Another take is, and this is just, if you step back for a second, if you look at before 2020, what was the state of things? And then you add this on. State of things was most folks are, by and large, working relatively meaningless jobs, working relatively, they might be producing sandwiches. They might work at a Subway like I used to. They might be doing something that's sort of menial labor. Or they might work in an office, but it doesn't give them any personal meaning. They don't feel like they're fit into some larger purpose. They're just sort of providing a service within some small subset of the economy. They're not making enough money.
Yeah,
they're alienated. They're not making enough money to really save up or give themselves some long-term security. Wages are going down while the cost of living rises, of course. And this is all happening while the currency that they're earning their money in is showing strong signs of depreciation over time. I'll just put it like that, where it seems like we're going through inflation, and there might be a period where that gets a lot worse, when the debtor starts to collect, so to speak, on an international scale. So all of that's happening. And then a pandemic hits, and a lot of folks, you just lose your job, and there's not one to be found. And you're told that you can't go get another job effectively, because if you do, you're going to be exposing yourself and other people and potentially endangering society. And then what are you supposed to do? You're told to stay at home, away from other people, away from your close friends and family, isolated emotionally and physically and intellectually, et cetera, from the people that you care about. And that's your life, I guess. And yeah, and Congress, apparently, we see Nancy Pelosi talking about on TV, like we were talking about yesterday again with Mark Frost, about how we give them food, about how they're actually currently fulfilling our needs, and they're not. If you step back for a second, I want to watch the clip that you're talking about. It sounds embarrassing on Dick Durbin's part, but that's the ivory tower aspect of Congress coming in, where they're completely disassociated from what's actually happening, from the lives that people are living. And it's a human tragedy on a large scale. That's one way of putting it. And we really need to figure out some way to solve it. We're going into a break. We'll be back in a minute on the other side of this break with Mark Sleboda. You guys are listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. Be right back.
Fault Lines.
You're listening to Radio Sputnik.
Epidemics and pandemics could kill millions of people, and they actually did. Centuries ago, deadly outbreaks called the Black Death, the Plague of Justinian, and the Spanish flu ravaged countries, empires, and whole continents. Some of these diseases are still present around the globe. Others have become a thing of the past. Discover how these ancient and not so distant outbreaks from previous centuries differ from modern-day SARS, MERS, and coronavirus pandemics. Listen to our new series, Outbreak, the deadliest epidemics in human history, this week on Radio Sputnik.
Fault Lines.
And we're back. You're listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. And we are joined now by Mark Sleboda. He is an international relations and security analyst. Mark, thank you for joining us. How are you doing this morning?
Thanks for having me. It's always an honor and a pleasure to be on Fault Lines.
It's great to have you. I'm just going to check in. How are things going over there? I mean, I know that you live in Moscow. Last I checked.
Yep.
We have heard. We have obviously we have you on as a frequent guest. We have heard that Russia had its vaccine rollout in August, and on an initial basis. That's significantly earlier than the United States has. I'm just curious, just doing a quick sort of A/B. How are things going over there with the vaccine? What's the sort of news media's take on it before we get into our conversation here? And what's the state of things broadly with COVID? Mark.
Well, I mean, the pandemic is still raging, much like it is in the United States, although to a lesser degree. But Russia has, less than half the population of the United States. But recently, the Russian government just revised the numbers of total deaths attributed to coronavirus upwards from 55,000 to 186,000. Something had long been expected because it started to include those numbers of people that had COVID when they died, but that an autopsy did not determine that was the direct cause of death. Basically, now if you died and of not of a car accident or something, but of any medical related effect, and you tested positive for coronavirus either before or after, now you're included in the death totals, and that brings Russia more in line on a per capita basis with the same level that most European countries countries have been suffering. But the vaccine is rolling out. It rolled out first, of course, to considered front line and necessary workers. Of course, doctors, nurses, school teachers, EMTs, police. The military also had early access to it, and that's been spreading about. But it has to be said that among the Russian general population, there is almost as much skepticism about a vaccine, whether that's about COVID, about the vaccine, or about the need of it, as in the United States. And we've seen very similar polling numbers here of people that said, that they at least of about a month ago, that people don't want the vaccine, don't want any vaccine. In particular, we haven't seen yet a huge turn on that, although with Putin himself announcing recently that he will be receiving the vaccine, hopefully that will start to shift the numbers away from the anti-vaxxer contingent.
Mark, I want to get into a bit of history, let's say Russian history.
Sure.
I've been binge reading recently. I've been really interested in the Russian Revolution, the previous wars, and those type of things. But also, the hook, I guess, into this episode is the fall of the Soviet Union. I mean, December 25th, just past Christmas, and a lot of people don't know that. A lot of people don't pay attention to that. But that was a major, major deal in regards to the change in the dynamics, or let's say the geopolitical dynamics of our world. There was a lot of, let's say, petty stuff going on between Gorbachev and Yeltsin, to put it mildly. But beyond the petty stuff, there's this really interesting dynamic where Gorbachev is a reformer. He's trying to, bring this over. His thing is a very basic question. Why is it that our lot is worse? Meaning, why is it that we're holding on to this union of sorts, but the lot of the various nations are worse? I mean, there was a scene where you have a situation where Germany is bringing food into the conquered, into the government that conquered Germany. And it's like this level of, oh God, what is going wrong in this situation? And so all of these guys recognized something needed to change. Gorbachev was pushing glasnost, perestroika. And the interesting dynamic to this is, just because you allow people to talk more doesn't necessarily mean they're going to talk nice about you. And if you have a government that is clearly not having the things on the shelves, not having these items, well, the people, when they first start talking, they go after you. My question has to do with Yeltsin, though. Gorbachev understood that what Yeltsin was talking about was shock capitalism. That basically you're trying to push further than I'm trying to push. Gorbachev was already a radical. And Yeltsin is like, yeah, let's open it up. Let's get rid of this. I want a singular Russia and all this other stuff and all of these other states. Did the people understand what was going to happen? And that's the part that's phenomenal to me. From the standpoint, the arguments were being made of saying this is what's going to take place. But at this point, the people were already on Yeltsin's side. Of standing on a tank and all of these other things. But from the standpoint of the economics and the politics of what was going to take place, there were arguments that were being made that what he's going to do is going to be catastrophic. Did the people know? And was Yeltsin being backed by, let's say, capitalist interests that were allowed when Gorbachev started to open up the country and the economy?
Okay, so you talked about a lot there. Let's first deal with this issue of the starving Soviet people and bread lines and everything. Okay, you have to realize first and foremost that is largely a mythology, and what of it isn't is very contextual. Okay, people were not starving to death, all through the life of the Soviet Union. No one died of starvation or hunger or malnutrition in the Soviet Union. In fact, the 1970s era under Brezhnev is still considered by Russians as the time when most feel that their economic situation and the economic situation of the country was at its peak. It is when Gorbachev came to power and started radical decentralization, not just of the government, but of the economic system. That is when there started to be huge distribution problems and corruption in the country that then led to shortages and so on. And again, no one starved to death, but there were bread lines, and then there were shortages and there were some empty shelves. That was because that Gorbachev started messing with the existing economic system without any real clear good plan of how to transition to something else. And that is what created a lot of discontent across not just Russia, but the rest of the Soviet Union as well. And you have to remember the context of some of these things. As first you had the Warsaw Pact countries break away, or basically Gorbachev said, you're free, go do what you want. We're not going to enforce anything anymore. And this was a time that in many of the Warsaw Pact countries, there were ground up grassroots, popular protests against the communist governments in those countries, and they fell for the most part peacefully. Of course, Romania is one of the exceptions there. And then the Soviet Union itself started to fracture. First, the Baltic republics seceded from the Soviet Union. And then there was actually a coup attempt in August of 1991 against Gorbachev by hardline communists that failed ultimately, but actually, ironically, probably made sure that the Soviet Union wouldn't survive. Now, in 1991, there were two competing referendums, something that hadn't really been done throughout the whole history of the Soviet Union. There were lots of polls and lots of things, but there was a specific referendum in 1991 on the continuation of the Soviet Union. And the question asked, do you consider necessary the preservation of the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics as a renewed federation of equal sovereign republics in which the rights and freedoms of an individual of any ethnicity will be fully guaranteed? Okay, so basically, do we keep a Soviet Union? Right, a renewed Soviet Union. And this was held across the Soviet Union, except in the Baltic countries, Armenia and Georgia, and Moldova, it must be said. But across the rest of the Soviet Union, which is still the majority of the population, turnout was very high, and it was some 80%. And of those 80% that turned out, nearly 80% of these 9 republics voted to keep a Soviet Union. They did not want to dissolve the Soviet Union. And at the same time, there was at essence, contradictory referendum in the Russian Federation, the Russian Soviet Federal Socialist Republic. And that was asking the people of Russia, do you want a president, to create a presidential figure in Russia itself? And that was overwhelmingly 71.4% in support, which would seem to contradict, of course, the idea of keeping the Soviet Union. But you can talk internal, federal politics. It was a very confusing time, and public opinion was going wildly one way or another. And a lot of the existing political figures in the country were, flip-flopping themselves in various positions. And there was a huge, not just a petty rivalry, but a huge political rivalry between Yeltsin and Gorbachev. And Yeltsin is, at the same time as he's liberal democratic and a great friend of Clinton, he would later become known in Russia as a drunken kleptocrat, but he's also a nationalist. And he's seizing power for Russia while taking power away from the Soviet government. Gorbachev, meanwhile, had basically lost control of everything, economically, politically. When he came back from the coup, he never had any real power after that. And in this, what you were talking about before, in early December 1991, there was this fateful meeting known as the Belovezha Accords, where the leaders of three of the Soviet republics, Boris Yeltsin, Kravchuk from Ukraine, and Shushkevich from Belarus, got together in Belovezha, literally in a forest in the middle of the night, and declared the Soviet Union dissolved. And there are huge questions remaining to this day that, did they actually have any constitutional authority to do this, right? And, what about the other members of the Soviet Union and so forth? Well, that's lost to history, because the Soviet Union, it was generally accepted the Soviet Union was dissolved, though people had just voted to retain it, at least in some form. That document then disappeared.
Let's take a break, and I'm going to bring you back.
Yeah.
I never said they were. I never made the argument about bread lines. I just was saying that in the last day of the Soviet Union, as the book was going through, was making this point about how some of the people were bothered, especially, like you said, during Gorbachev's reforms. That basically destabilized the country, destabilized food, and all of those things. Like you said, it was a complicated time frame, especially from the standpoint of sovereignty of Russia. Yeltsin added that question into the Russian one, which complicated all of it. Let's do this. Let's take a break. You guys are listening to Fault Lines with Thomas Stranahan. The guest you're listening to is Mark Sleboda, an international relations and security analyst. We will be back in a moment.
Fault Lines.
This is Radio Sputnik.
Are you bored? Are you lonely? Do you need a hug? Well, we can't give you that, but we can keep you up to date on Radio Sputnik.
Fault Lines.
Welcome back to Fault Lines on Radio Sputnik. My name is Jamarl Thomas. I'm joined by my co-host Shane Stranahan, coming to you live out of our station in Washington, D.C. Joining us for a wide-ranging conversation that I am totally interested in is Mark Sleboda, an international relations and security analyst. Mark, we were talking about basically what was taking place in 1991, where, like you said, you had the coup, and then once you come from the coup, Gorbachev basically is depowered. You have an ascendant Yeltsin, who's basically using Russia nationalism as a power base. People realize and want things to change. By the same token, the question becomes changing into what? And my question is, did they know? Meaning Yeltsin, like you said, he ends up with this reputation as being somewhat of a drunkard. There are scenes that Bill Clinton talks about with him being in his underwear, like just these really unstately scenes, let's put it that way. And he gets back to a country that he seems to have a difficult time controlling. It's almost as if he didn't understand why Gorbachev was doing these kind of conflicted steps. Because I think on some level, Gorbachev understood the difficulty in moving from one system to another. Yeltsin's argument was just, let's just do it. And when he did it, what happened? So let's start in that frame. Did people know? Like, was Yeltsin being backed by... There's an interesting scene where Gorbachev tells Yeltsin, you'll never work in this town again. Basically, you'll never be in politics again. And one of the gentlemen goes with Yeltsin, and the book made reference to him being paid like 10 times as much by these other people, basically to keep Yeltsin safe. The capitalist element that started to build in, let's say Russia or the Soviet Union, when Glasnost and Perestroika was allowed to go through, were those elements at that point like pushing for their ends? Like, was it this notion of, all right, we have a base, let's ensure this base, and Yeltsin is our guy? I'm trying to understand beyond just the reading of the history of it into the politics of what was going on at the time, because the book kind of leaves off politics and it's stuff where the book is like, yeah, I don't buy that. So can you go into the politics of that era and even into this notion of shock capitalism that Yeltsin put in or pushed through at this point? I think Bill Clinton was taking office because Bush had lost. I'll let you take it, Mark.
Yeah, I mean, I think you really could do a very good reading and analysis of this period using Naomi Klein's The Shock Doctrine and this shock therapy privatization to discuss what was some of the corrupt interests and also the neoliberal ideological interests behind the privatizations that occurred under Yeltsin and the political forces that galvanized around him, basically because they saw it as their best opportunity to not only change the system but to become immensely wealthy themselves in the process. And a lot of those people came out of the Communist Party itself. But when we're talking about, did the people know? No, the people had no idea what was coming. But I would also argue neither did Yeltsin and neither did Gorbachev. None of them had any idea what was coming or how bad it was being. While in the other countries of the Warsaw Pact, there was this mass protest, this ground up rebellion of the people in some way. In the Russia, particularly the Soviet Union, but particularly in Russia also, it was the opposite. This was a top-down decision that was dictated. We saw this referendum. People wanted to retain the Soviet Union, and they wanted freedom, economic freedom, but at the same time they wanted economic security, stability. All the free higher education, free healthcare, guaranteed jobs, all these things, and no one had any idea that was all about to vanish as this was happening. But you have to remember that also inflation went crazy, and basically every Russian family lost their savings, right? Except of course, from the new privileged few capitalist elite that learned how to game the system and the rigged auctions and the privatizations that would follow. But Russians lost everything. I mean, this was a economic catastrophe during the 1990s under Yeltsin that is several times deeper than the Great Depression as it was experienced by the United States. And Russians still have political trauma today, remembering that period, what they all lost. And that's why today, still today, liberals in Russia have next to no political power or approval, while at the same time, nostalgia for the Soviet Union, for what was lost, is at its highest, since the fall of the Soviet Union. It was just 2 years ago, in 2018, that some 66% of Russians said they regret that the USSR broke up, and the majority of them were for the economic equality and conditions that existed before, of course, the Gorbachev and Yeltsin era. But this elite, this top-down dissolution of the Soviet Union, that started with Gorbachev, and Gorbachev was incredibly naive, and he imagined that the West, he believed everything they told him. He believed that they were going to reach across and help Russia transition, but he also naively believed, for some reason, that the West would transition at the same time. Yes. And that the U.S. and the Soviet Union would form some type of new
arrangement. That's the wild part.
Half socialist utopia.
He was a true believer. He was a true believer. Yeah. Like, he honestly did believe that the U.S. and they were going to be able to put it into the Cold War. This was going to be a new time frame. Yeah. He believed all of that stuff, and that is the exact opposite of what happened.
Yeah,
this is during the 80s, though, right? I mean, this seems surprising to me that he would have that have that belief. This is during the mid 80s.
The end of the 80s. Yeah, the mid to the end 80s. He really did. I mean, and I wouldn't say he's a true believer. I said he was absolutely delusional. I mean, that's the way most Russians regard him. He really. If you start looking into the history and start reading the archives around his thought process, you see that he was really, really influenced by Western NGOs, by a number of figures and prominent peace and other NGOs that spoke to him, that really convinced him of these pie in the sky capabilities and what he thought would happen. Again, almost the complete opposite. The collapse, the dissolution, collapse of the Soviet Union. Again, top down. Not bottom up. It's the elite that lost the belief in the politics and the economic of the system, not the people so much. I mean, not to say there wasn't dissatisfaction, but this was Gorbachev and his top cadres around him. And, he created the conditions for Yeltsin, and Yeltsin started grabbing power wherever he could. And of course, he was encouraged by, the budding oligarchs and the mafia network in the country that was starting to emerge. But he was also greatly encouraged by his Western partners at the time that were pushing him, to seize the reins of power. And you have to remember that once Gorbachev was gone, Yeltsin basically made himself an autocrat. When there were disagreements between the then Russian parliamentary system and Yeltsin, he fired with tanks on the Duma, on the Russian Parliament building. There was fighting in the streets of Moscow. This is when Yeltsin, famously went up and climbed on top of a tank. And after that was over, he seized, basically dictatorial power in the country for a couple of years. And he was supported in all of this by the United States, by the West in general, because I would argue they had a much better idea what was happening than Yeltsin or himself did. I mean, things of course rapidly devolved out of control, both politically, economically, and personally for Yeltsin. He did become a drunken kleptocrat in that very short period of time. He was reelected, quote unquote, by the skin of his teeth when he was down incredibly going into that re-election period. And he was openly backed by an openly meddling the United States. I mean, you have to remember the cover of the Time magazine. We saved Russia. By getting Yeltsin reelected. I mean, there's movies glamorizing this meddling in the United States. Russians remember all of this, of course, and they remember it very unhappily. Yeltsin got another few years in power before he would eventually turn over to Putin and step down. But he was a mess by that time. And for years after all of these events, Yeltsin and Gorbachev polled as the most hated people in the country, 1 and 2, going back and forth, till today. I mean, that goes to today. Yeltsin died one of the most hated men in Russia. The only one who might have been more hated than him was either Gorbachev, who's still hated in the country, or Chubais, who was one of the main political figures under Yeltsin behind the auctions and the privatizations.
Mark, in our last few seconds, because we've got less than a minute left, I wanted to get to Chubais. We haven't really brought in Larry Summers or Harvard or any of that stuff. But with Chubais, do you think he and the rest of the class here learned any lessons? Is there any sense that they understood what was going on, or any kind of post-capitalist, post-shock capitalism process, or are they just benighted, Mark?
I mean, they understood it to a better degree than everyone else. Of course, things were still wildly slipping out of their control, but there's also no question that they exploited and profited them and their friends, the kleptocratic family, in the process. They as it devolved out of control, they still profited from it.
You know what? Thank you so much, Mark. This is such an interesting conversation. Thank you, Jamarl, for initiating this. For those listening, Mark Sleboda, international relations and security analyst. By the way, you can and you should follow Mark on Twitter at MarkSleboda1. You can also find him on Facebook at facebook.com/Gramsci. You're listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. We will be back on the other side of this short break with headlines and another 2 hours.
Listening to Radio Sputnik. Telling the untold.
Fault Lines.
Live from the divided states of America, welcome to your daily inoculation for propaganda. In the left corner, I am the indefatigable, the ever-vigilant, the last antibody to a sick and seizing political system, your political analyst, Jamarl Thomas.
And in the independent corner, I am your political analyst, Shane Stranahan.
That means you are listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. Yeah, shout out to Mark, man. I am always uber interested. I am a history geek like nobody's business, so having those opportunities to talk to about stuff like that is great. So
it's fascinating. Yeah, he was very good. He's a teacher, he's a professor.
Yeah,
you can tell he was able to give a pretty authoritative overview of any side of that we wanted to cover. Real quick note before you get to headlines here, we're going to be off the air this Friday. It's New Year's Day. I'm just throwing that in during this hour. Anyway,
perfect. People be like, where are they? What happened? They shut them down.
Exactly.
All right, let's get to the headlines. In the news, at least 3,626 new COVID deaths. Here's the thing. When the deaths came in yesterday at 1,300 or something, my thought was, it's the holidays. They're probably not getting the true count. Well, this is probably the true count. At least 3,626 new coronavirus deaths and 200,902 new cases were reported in the United States yesterday. Over the past week, there's been an average of 183,030 cases per day, a decrease of 11% from the average 2 weeks earlier. I still think that's the holidays. But state health officials in Colorado announced Tuesday that they identified America's first confirmed case of a fast-spreading COVID-19 variant first identified in the United Kingdom. Colorado officials said the case has been identified by the state public health laboratory in a male in his 20s with, quote, no travel history, unquote. Britain on Wednesday became the first country in the world to approve a coronavirus vaccine developed by Oxford University and AstraZeneca. Britain has ordered 100 million doses of the vaccine. A recently elected U.S. lawmaker, Republican Luke Letlow, 41 years old, has died from COVID-19. He was elected as a representative for Louisiana's 5th District and was due to be sworn in on Sunday. He announced his positive COVID test on December 18th, was admitted to the hospital on the 19th, ICU'd on the 23rd, and finally died on the 29th. 41 years old. Wow. Yesterday, Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell blocked an attempt by Senate Minority Leader Chuck Schumer to unanimously approve a House bill to increase direct payments in the coronavirus relief package to $2,000 from $600. The Kentucky Republican later in the day introduced a bill that would boost the size of the checks to $2,000 from $600, repeal Section 230 legal liability protections for internet platforms, and create a commission to study election issues. The bill would meet all of Donald Trump's recent demands. But of course, Democrats are not going to be on board for repealing 230. Pence has refused to support an initiative led by lawmaker Louis Gohmert to avert certification of Joe Biden's victory in the presidential election. In the new lawsuit against Pence, filed on Tuesday, the plaintiffs said they tried to resolve the issue without litigation, but reaching out to Pence, but failed to enlist his support. Had Pence agreed to join the effort, he would be able to prevent Congress from counting the pro-Biden votes of electors in such states as Arizona and Pennsylvania. As it is, under the 1887 law, the vice president's role at the upcoming Congress meeting to certify the president-elect's victory is merely ceremonial. Shane, what do you think about that? I always think those things are ceremonial until they're not. Meaning there's all sorts of points that we consider to be perfunctory because they've always just been that way. But if you were trying to, let's say, put a wedge into something to try to, let's say, hold up the election, to stop the election, to block it, to steal it, then you're looking for all of those little entry points to try to put a lock in it or screw with it. Pence is one of the interesting cases. So one of the videos came up at the Lincoln Project that apparently was bugging Donald Trump was that Pence was going to basically be the person who gavels Joe Biden into office and will shake his hand and say, "Welcome to the office, President of the United States, Joe Biden." And Donald Trump considered that the ultimate betrayal. Do you think there's anything to this? Like, let's say Pence said, "Okay, I agree with you." What happens? Like, it's all of these little interesting aspects of our politics that typically go automatically that we don't necessarily pay attention to. And the question arises, well, what happens if they do that? Then what? Is there some mechanism in law? Is there some other, and eventually you always get to a point where the answer is no. You expect people to do this, and when people don't do that, you get into a fudge. What do you think about them trying to get Pence to do this? I mean, was there any chance at all that Pence was going to do this?
That's up to Pence, and the answer is no, as far as I can tell. I mean, it's hard to tell looking at it from many hundreds, if not thousands, of miles away, and a world of experience away from where he's sitting or whatever. But to answer your first question, this is not just ceremonial. He could have played a part in that. Now, whether that part would have worked, whether he would have been able to successfully prevent Biden from stepping into the office, I doubt that last part, but he could have thrown up some more obstacles. And if he and enough others had decided to contest this, then, there's a decent chance that there would be an actual ongoing fight right now, as opposed to as opposed to Trump muttering treason, retweeting folks who are talking about this being treason, and not really doing all that much to actually stay in office, if you get where I'm going. But to answer your question, this is not merely ceremonial. Ceremonies are by and large not merely ceremonial. If you have something, if you say that it's true. If you say that a ceremony is merely ceremonial, then in some sense it has already lost its ceremonial value. Ceremonies have import. They are important. They mean things in a political context, in a cultural context, and they aren't just signifiers of things. But in this case, him like you're talking about with the actually confirming Biden, that is not just a sort of time-honored part of the American tradition. He could also choose to abstain from that. He could choose to do different things that would disrupt the flow of history and therefore not be merely ceremonial. Yeah. I don't mean to fixate on that specific phrase, I agree with you. I think you might get where I'm going.
But it's an interesting point. It's like, if it's ceremonial, then it's pointless. If it's not, and this is not a pointless endeavor. Like you said, he has options. Yeah. There are things that he can do that screws us up, that gets across that this is not just ceremonial. No, I get your point. It's if it's only and purely ceremonial, then it's lost all value, then it's a pointless endeavor. But they're calling it ceremonial. Yeah.
They always have one, like if your father is at the wedding, but your father chooses not to walk you down the aisle as a woman, getting married, then that's not merely ceremonial. You're going to have arguments about that. There's probably a big set of reasons for why that happened. This example comes randomly to my mind, but some people might say that's a ceremonial thing to do, and that's true, but that's going to have consequences. There's a whole history of things there. It's going to massively disrupt the future of the family. And even that, is the queen a ceremonial figurehead? No. She's not, the Queen of England. She's not just that. She's much more than that. If something is merely ceremonial, it's like saying that something that somebody said is merely rhetorical in some sense, like a tree falling in the forest and nobody hearing it. If you get what I'm saying, there's always, if it's worth listening to, if it's worth doing, then there's always some important substance on the other side of it that you're going to get. Anyway, I'm rambling at this point.
Calling it ceremonial to some degree tries to undermine the value of it. But why is it happening if it's no value to it? No, I understand where you're coming from.
There's a point there. Totally.
The Louisville, the New York Times did a really good depiction of this. I think it was yesterday. The Louisville Metro Police Department has moved to fire 2 officers involved in a fatal shooting of Breonna Taylor in her apartment earlier this year. Officer Miles Cosgrove and Detective Joshua James were both notified of termination on Tuesday. A ballistic analysis determined that Cosgrove fired the shot that killed Taylor. James was not present at the shooting but prepared the search warrant for Taylor's apartment. Can't believe that the only thing that happens to killers is that they're just fired. Former U.S. Ambassador to the United Nations, Nikki Haley, took to Twitter on Tuesday to express her opinion about socialism in the Joe Biden administration. Let's stop there for a moment. There is no relation to socialism and Joe Biden. If there was, I and a lot of other people would be more inclined to support him. This is a right-wing perspective of this that has no basis in reality, with a caveat. What she's considered socialism is basically this cultural stuff that basically eliminates all notion of the economics. Meaning, let's just get into it. Former U.S. Ambassador, go ahead, Shane.
Well, yeah, it's like wokeism. So if there's wokeism and there's socialism, those both fall under the banner of sort of different stripes of progressivism, which is where there's conflation. Broadly, people who are quote unquote woke are on the left and people who are socialist are on the left. And therefore there's a conflation between the two.
Yeah, but it's I'll
note that there's substantial battling on the left right now between the socialists and the quote unquote woke crowd over, the role of class and intersectionalism race. And all this stuff.
Yeah, well, the woke crowd uses race as props in lieu of not dealing with economics. Meaning, Obama gave 95% of the income gains to the top 1%. His blackness didn't stop him from doing that. His blackness didn't protect the homeowners that went bust. His blackness didn't do any of that stuff. Like, his blackness didn't stop the people from being put in prison for pot. And nor did he get those people out of prison. Even though I would wager that he knows that Nixon started that drug war to lock up blacks and hippies. I'm making a point that just because a person is of a particular color, I get the implicit aspect of this. That just because their color is a particular thing or their gender is a particular thing, that they somehow do something beneficial that goes beyond just a person of color or a woman being in that spot. I'm saying that the trophy politics of the 60s needs to transition into action. And the wokeness stuff is a shiny object. It's not, is what they use in lieu of actual real policy for the best interest of the public and for those racial distinctions. So I get Nikki Haley doing this, and in her attack on this makes sense in the context of a Democratic Party that puts people of color and everything else in lieu of doing policy for those people of color in an economic fashion. So I get where she's coming from. I just always cringed at this when I hear wokeism being talked about in the vein of socialism, because these things are radically different. But yeah, I love it. Wokeism, that's the way to call it. She tweeted, "Liberal elites have been conquered by the woke. They demand freedom but want to silence and control everyone who disagrees with them. They demand equality but want to build a new society based on discrimination. They are set on using the full force of government to achieve their vision. The left is forcing its anti-American worldview into classrooms. It's taking over corporate boardrooms, pushing businesses to make decisions based on politics and not what's best for consumers and communities. Big tech is censoring conservative voices and forcing its leftist views on society. With Biden as president, we should all be worried about the woke left. They will stifle free speech in the name of freedom and enact discriminatory policies in pursuit of equality, and do it with a vision that has no resemblance to the America we know and love." Now, considering there was never a United States. We all had our various enclaves. She's being very specific in who she is talking to here. What do you think about this, Shane? There's some truth in this, even though there's a lot of projection in this also. I mean, after all, Donald Trump was using the weight of the government to attack Chinese companies or put sanctions on Turkey for using Russian weapons. So let's be clear, the politics was infused into the under Trump administration also. Let's be fair. But what do you think about this commentary? There is truth in this. There
is. I've already said my piece, though. I'm happy to, if you want to go to the next headlines, we still got time. Yeah. Thank you, though.
All right, so let's go to the next one. Today, European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen and European Council President said, it sounded weird. Von der Leyen? Shane, Ursula.
I believe. I'm pretty darn sure it's Ursula von der Leyen.
Okay, Ursula von der Leyen and European Council President Charles Michel signed the post-Brexit deal with the United Kingdom. The signing ceremony took place at the headquarters of the EU Council in Brussels. And today, the parties signed 3 documents: an agreement on trade and cooperation, an agreement on procedures for exchanges and protection of confidential information, and the agreement on cooperation in the peaceful use of atomic energy. Those are your headlines. You're listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. All right, we have a few more, but we can stop here. You guys are listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. We will be back in a moment.
Fault Lines. Want to talk? Get in touch with us at radio@sputniknews.com.
What's the most important hour of the day? It's the Critical Hour with Dr. Wilmer Leon. On this show, we don't just deliver the latest headlines. We divide the real from the fake. Tune in to hear from some of the most brilliant political minds of today. Get in-depth news and analysis that goes beyond the surface and dig straight into the details. Set your clock to the Critical Hour for a news perspective unlike any of those other guys. Tune in to the Critical Hour with Dr. Wilmer Leon, weekdays 6 to 7 p.m. Eastern, and catch us on Facebook Live. You're listening to Radio Sputnik.
Fault Lines.
Welcome back to Fault Lines on Radio Sputnik. My name is Jamarl Thomas. I'm joined by my co-host Shane Stranahan, coming to you live out of our station in Washington, D.C. If you guys live in the area, you can catch us on radio at 105.5 FM and 1390 AM. We're also in Kansas City at 102.9 FM and 104.7 FM. If you guys are digging what Shane and I are putting down, whatever platform you're consuming this content on, give us a like and share that audio or video. If you want to join in on the conversation, you can send us a chat, a tweet, and of course, you can reach us by phone at 202-521-1320. That is 202-521-1320. Your engagement makes the show what it is, so definitely don't be shy. But joining us, guest Christian Smalls, activist and founder of TCOEW, the Congress of Essential Workers, a collective of essential workers and allies across the United States. He's best known as organizer responsible for staging a walkout at an Amazon regional fulfillment center in Staten Island, New York, following the company's failure to protect him and his fellow workers, despite learning that an employee tested positive for COVID-19. Christian, welcome to the show, man.
Hey, thanks for having me again.
Absolutely.
How you doing?
So tell me, before we get into the other conversation, because I kind of want to get into the latest on Amazon, but your TCOE, the Congress of Essential Workers, how has that been going? Can you give us just the basic overview of what that is? You're basically trying to pull workers from various industries into a super union of sorts. And I don't mean that as a pejorative, I mean that almost as a literal thing of what I'm thinking about.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Throughout my journey of organizing, ever since I was fired back in March, people have reached out to me from pretty much all over the country and all over the world. And these individuals that I have in my organization, we pretty much came together back in, I want to say about July, came together, we founded the organization. And ever since then, we've just been traveling the country, literally traveling the country throughout the midst of the pandemic, protesting and advocating for voices of Amazon, for those who are unheard, those that have underlying health conditions, those that are still at work, that are afraid to speak up because of retaliation, and those that want their demands and voices heard. We are a collective of essential workers. That's basically what we are. All essential workers, and we want better for society. We want better for workers' rights in this country, and that's what we stand. That's what TCOEW stands for. We're the Congress of Essential Workers, and we believe one day we have enough workers' power that we'll actually have more power than Congress.
Well, you do have more workers' power. It's just getting you guys together. I mean, if you think about the number of people that work at, let's say, Amazon, the number of people who work at the various grocery stores or retail shops, all of those people are, for the most part, in the same boat. The issue is trying to get those people together and where they can recognize that they're on the same boat and recognize that their lot is linked. And that seems to be, for whatever reason, the hard part, even though that seems to be the part that will make the most sense. When you're talking to the various workers in the various companies to try to get them to kind of join together under the umbrella, what's the conversation? I know some of it is fear of retribution from the company itself or the companies that the people work for. But what is the main argument you use to try to bring them onto your side? And what's the base pushback, if you get pushback from that conversation?
Well, yeah, I mean, to be honest with you, a lot of the workers that's a part of the organization, they pretty much come to me. I don't force it upon people to join. A lot of them are fed up and they had enough with their employer. And they're like, they want to do something. They want to fight back. And we created a space for them to do that. We provide legal representation. We try to find them mutual aid in their community if needed. We provide a multiple of services that, they may need. And we want it to be a natural relationship. My organization is very family oriented. Everybody looks out for one another. You pretty much have 24/7 support because you need it right now. Because even in the midst of the pandemic, people going through a lot of mental stress right now, and suicide is real in this pandemic. People they're fed up and they're just tired of what's going on, and they need somebody to talk to. So we have people from different time zones, like I mentioned, all over the country. We have some members that are either overseas in the UK. And we absolutely are there for one another. And that's what it's about. When these workers come to me and we have that conversation, they're telling me about their own personal work experiences, to be honest with you. And how it relates to my firing is that I stood up for that very reason, fighting back against these oligarchs and these juggernaut companies. They're ready to take that position now. So it has to be a commitment from them as well. They have to be ready to put their neck on the line, and a lot of them are.
Okay, so another way of looking at this, thank you again for joining us, Chris. Another way of looking at this is through the lens of the term essential workers, that phrase, which, as far as I can tell, is it would have been used before the pandemic, but really earlier this year was the first time that it kind of came to prominence, as far as I can tell. And it'll persist for at least a year or two. That's a very interesting term. If you look at that from the perspective of a strike, essential workers are by definition needed. And therefore, if you can get them to strike, then you're going to have a serious amount of power there. I'm curious. There are different ways that you can look at this. There's a conversation of, if you were to do a strike, whether, what kinds of scabs you'd get, what kinds of people you'd see deciding to work in these capacities anyway, especially because a lot of these positions are, quote unquote low skill, or ones that people can come in from the street and start doing. So there's that. But I'm just curious, do you see that term? Obviously, you built your organization around that. Do you see that term, that idea persisting into the future for years? Or what's your take on that sort of set of thoughts, Chris?
Absolutely. The government wanted to deem us essential workers. Well, we need to be treated like essential workers, like you mentioned. Essential, that means that we are a necessity. That means that they need us. And that's what it's about. We got to change that mentality here in the country, in the U.S. especially, that, that these are low-skilled workers. These are unskilled, untrained workers. Because, that's the issue that we have. The narrative and essential workers are, we don't deserve to be paid $15 an hour. We don't deserve to be paid, $30 an hour, which we're advocating for, actually. Put it like this. Jeff Bezos, richest man in the world, is not coming to his own warehouses and doing what we essential workers are doing. He can't do what we do. A lot of our bosses, our own direct managers, it won't even last one day in our shoes. But who really has skills? Who really has the power?
Right.
That's us. And that's what it's about. When we're out here demonstrating, we're telling our stories, I'm pretty much telling essential workers, like, our value is priceless, because I trained my bosses. I trained my managers. So, for people to say that we're unskilled and untrained, it's just not true. I don't have a college education. I didn't graduate from college, and people wouldn't know that. That's the problem. That's the stigma that we have in society. Yeah, I've seen it. The leaked memo. I'm not smart or articulate.
Yeah.
But that's obviously not true.
Christian,
Ivy League.
God, man.
But here I am.
How do we get that mindset into American workers? Because you're so right. There's this weird internal stigma that takes place when you're working at shops like that. Let's say, like, I used to be a barista at Joe Mugg's in Richmond, and I think I was making like $6.50. And like you said, there's a huge amount of work that go in for the course of a day. And at the end of the day, like you made the point, Jeff Bezos is not working at that factory. Jeff Bezos can get a loan from the bank. And Jeff Bezos will sit there with buckets of money with no company, because he requires those workers working in that shop, or at the very least people coming to those stores, or at the very least workers making the streets, keeping the lights on. Like, all of these things are public and social will for Bezos to make a buck. And yet they act as if the workers themselves are not necessarily valuable. This is insane. The workers are the ones that make that shop work. And so it's like, how do you instill that mindset? And there's one more thing. There's a secondary mindset about value and worth and about what people should be paid. I've met people who would say, I'm a secretary, I make $15 an hour. Those fry cooks shouldn't make $15 an hour. Instead of being in your headspace of like, yeah, those fry cooks should get $50 an hour, maybe I should get more. It's very strange in this kind of crab mentality that we have in regards to this kind of 1% thinking from the standpoint of poverty line. What do you think about that? What do you say about that? And how do you instill that into the American worker for them to understand and realize that not only are they essential, they are the necessary component to whatever job or to whatever company they're working at?
Yeah, like I said, when we do these actions, the reason why I travel the country and I bring this to the front lines and to Front Street when we do these demonstrations, our stories, our personal stories is meant to connect with society, connect with people that's in the audience, people that never heard direct stories from essential workers or Amazon workers or whoever's speaking for us, have a speaking opportunity. And when we tell these stories, I try to do what I just did, tell people the value that we have as essential workers. We have more value than our own employer because they cannot do what we do. And that's what we have to continue to do. We have to stay consistent. And like I said before, the government wants to use this term essential workers. We're going to run with that. We're going to run that we're essential and we're a necessity and you need us, then we need to be paid like that. We need to be treated like that. And I agree with you. $15 an hour for a fry cook and $15 an hour for a secretary. Yeah, maybe the secretary needs to be paid more. People got to understand, why do you have to work multiple jobs just to make ends meet? Why can't we have a decent living wage at one job and have some time to enjoy your family? or have some time to go on vacation, have some time to go, put a down payment on a house. The American dream is just not what it is anymore. They sell us this dream that you have to become rich to get by. No, we just want to have a basic human right. Medicare for all, a decent living wage, paid medical leave. These are basic things. So we have
Chris, this sounds entirely reasonable. We only have like less than a minute left. I just want to make sure we get this in. Where can folks learn more? Do you have any events coming up that people should know about, that kind of thing? Chris, please take it away.
Oh yeah, actually tonight I'm gonna participate with the People's Party Force the Vote town hall meeting. We're trying to force the vote for the squad, the progressive leaders that are in Congress, who put the Medicare for all on the table. Use their campaign promises like they promised us, and go against Nancy Pelosi. I advise everybody to tune in. You can look at it. I have tweeted it on my Instagram and on Twitter at @shut_down, Amazon, at People's Party. Tune in tonight. It's going to be a very powerful event.
Also, tcoew.org. That stands for the Congress of Essential Workers organization we've been talking about. Chris, thank you for joining us.
Anytime. Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. Thank you. Thank you again for being with us. For those listening, Christian Smalls is an activist and founder of the Congress of Essential Workers, a collective of essential workers and allies across the U.S. You can follow them on Twitter at TCOEW and check out their website, tcoew.org. Also, as Chris mentioned, follow him on Twitter at @shut_, that's the character _shut_down Amazon. You're listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. We will be back in just a minute on the other side of this break.
Fault Lines. We are above all the latest developments, and we don't take any sides. Radio Sputnik, telling the untold.
In a media landscape filled with so-called journalists acting as stenographers for their billionaire bosses, there is a desperate need for news, analysis, and perspectives that buck the status quo and get to the heart of how domestic and international events impact you and me, as well as showing how we can get involved in the struggle to change that status quo. Check out By Any Means Necessary on Radio Sputnik, Monday through Friday from 2 to 4 p.m. Eastern, to hear the stories and voices that mainstream media refuses to tell you. And join us as we connect the political, social, and economic movements shaping the world around us. That's By Any Means Necessary, Monday through Friday at 2 to 4 p.m. Eastern, right here on Radio Sputnik.
Fault Lines.
And we are back. You're listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan and Nixon. We are joined by Garland Nixon, Sputnik political analyst and the co-host of the Critical Hour and Critical Hour Extended, airing right here on Radio Sputnik every Monday through Friday from 6 to 8 p.m. Eastern. You can follow Garland's work there, again, 6 to 8 p.m. Eastern, right here on Sputnik Critical Hour. Also check him out on Twitter, twitter.com/Garland Nixon, and Garland Nixon on Facebook and YouTube. Garland, thank you for joining us. How are you doing this morning?
I'm great. Good morning, guys, and Fault Lines family.
Absolutely. And I'll just start off right here. We're going to get into your top stories of 2020, or three biggest stories of 2020. But first, how have your holidays been? How have you been doing?
Pretty uneventful, you know. Of course, I generally like them to be pretty uneventful. So, you know, the only thing is I didn't get to stuff my face as much as I usually do at a family's home because, you know, we didn't have the normal gatherings. But it wasn't bad. It was a nice, restful time.
That's good. That's good to hear. All right, let's get into it. What are your? Let's just do a quick retrospective here. What were your top three biggest stories of 2020? What are the ones you think are most important, illuminating for our audience to understand? Garland.
Well, the first one I would start would be the Soleimani assassination and the subsequent response by Iran. The Soleimani assassination, you know, unfortunately, it wasn't as surprising as it should be with the aggression, particularly under the Trump administration against Iran. What was interesting, though, was that the Iranians shot back. The Iranians fired back. They were accurately able to use, highly technical military ordnance to strike the U.S. The U.S.'s anti-aircraft and anti-missile systems were unable to detect and shoot down the missiles, because certainly they would have loved to have done that and to have demonstrated their, the technical ability of their anti-aircraft and anti-missile technology. So we saw that the Iranians were able to design and effectively implement military ordnance and use it against the U.S. troops, and that the U.S. did not respond. So, it's been a long time since someone has shot back at the United States, has said, we're going to shoot back, and then shot back. Afterwards, a lot of people were holding their breath thinking, okay, the U.S. is going to start a war, but the U.S. didn't. So I learned a lot about that. Also, that the Iranians, in the way that they implemented it, they sent some messages through various channels to let the U.S. know what they were going to do. So it was just a very carefully and brilliantly orchestrated move by the Iranians. They, to quell the pushback they get at home for not responding, and to implement that without starting a broader war. I mean, I just thought it was a brilliant response, and they were able to demonstrate some technical expertise to cause their adversaries to back off a little bit.
Yeah, I can agree with that. Especially the nuance. There's a few parts to that. There's nuance politics that was being used. I was always enamored by the politics of it, because basically you had a situation where the United States is asymmetric warfare, where the U.S. is putting huge amounts of pressure, this pressure campaign, because Donald Trump wants something he can never get. He wants to get the deal. He's the deal maker. They would never give him a deal, because Rouhani was the moderate that came in. That was the guy who got the deal. And then for Trump or America to basically burn the moderate means there's no more deals to be had in this situation. And in fact, not just no more deals, you might even get rid of the moderate because you burned the guy. And so they did this two-step in regards to politics of, we're still going to tend to the deal. We're still going to stay with this deal because this deal allows a certain provision. I mean, they did everything that they could to pretty much stay with that deal and keep that deal intact, while Donald Trump basically was destroying that deal. And so, yeah, I can agree with you on the politics of it, and even the response where they struck back. There's one other response, the Houthis. If you remember this year, the Houthis took down 5% of the world oil with a drone strike, and it was suspected that Iran might have assisted with the technology. So yeah. I guess your point is this is the year that other countries or other entities basically fought back. That's what it sounds like.
Yeah. The U.S. usually beats up on small countries who are unable to defend themselves in any way. They stepped it up a little, like, okay, we're going to go after some regional powers, and they got a brush back. You know what I mean? Like in like pitchers do in Major League Baseball. They throw one up. They call it chin music, where they throw an inside pitch to back the batter off of the plate a little bit. The U.S. got backed off the plate a little bit by Iran. So I think that was a huge story. And Iran demonstrated diplomatic expertise and military expertise in the way they handled that. I thought that was a big one. Now, the pandemic, we can get to that, and George Floyd protest, but I think that's a big obvious one that we can hold on to. I tell you another thing that I thought was huge, and in a way it's related. The Bolivian election, in that the U.S. was effectively able to institute a coup, to overthrow the government, to put in a pro-fascist regime like the U.S. is so wont to do particularly in the global South. And the Bolivian social movement / political movement was able to hold on, to have an election, to force an election to which, first of all, the U.S.-backed government continually put off and postpone the election. They were able to do a general strike, so they used both social, political, and work actions to force the government to have an election and then to take back their government. And of course, meanwhile, in that area, we saw Ecuador, we saw Chile, we saw things going on there. We saw the Venezuelans able to hold off the able to hold off the regime change monsters from Venezuela and the oil thieves, in the face of, just searing sanctions. So, I mean, when you look at what's going on in South Central America, the Caribbean, with particularly Evo Morales at the head, there seems to be movements there, and there's social/political movements that are regaining power and holding off the U.S. I thought that was big stuff, considering the history of the U.S. and the regime change monsters from the U.K. in the global South.
So pushing for independence, effectively resistance, independence from the United States, which in light of the Monroe Doctrine, in light of the history here, is significant. That's kind of where you're going with that, right, Garland?
Yes, and keep in mind what you see forming is an anti-imperialist bloc of the United States' own making. What do we see now? We see China right now, Venezuela, they're getting Sputnik 5 vaccines. That's all over the news. So we see Venezuela, Russia, China, Bolivia, Iran. We see all of these countries, and what do they have in common? They're all facing massive sanctions by the U.S. So the U.S., with its sanctions program, has created an anti-imperialist bloc that's growing stronger. We see Iran sending ships when the U.S. basically said no one can send ships with parts or oil or anything with Venezuela, and we see Iran send a bunch of ships charging right through and basically dare the United States to do anything on the high seas, and the U.S. backs off. So I think this anti-imperialist bloc that's forming, and it's kind of the heart of it, I would argue right now, is probably Iran and say Bolivia, Venezuela, et cetera. But because China's there and China's very powerful, Russia's very powerful, they're able to get some big time allies. I think that's a huge story to keep an eye on moving forward.
I do think it's interesting when you have this kind of, when there is a unipolar world and there is nothing else, then you're right. Whatever the U.S. says goes at that point. When you start getting other countries in this multipolar world, then they're not stuck with one, like, for example, the Iraq War. Well, there was nothing else. At that point, the Soviet Union had basically fell. The United States was running around the world like it had won. And you have basically unencumbered access where they attack the country thinking that we can do this. What happens when you have multiple centers around the world of power sources, regional powers that are against your interests? I mean, at some level, oddly enough, with Trump screaming America first, he actually made it worse. Like, he made that effect of those countries coming together in this kind of joining against us worse. He elevated that process, not, made it better. What do you think about that? Do you think Biden is going to do any better with that? Or do you think the process continues? Better yet, what do you think happens with the Biden administration when he's coming in regards to these other countries that seem to be forming a bloc?
Very, very dangerous. I'm very concerned because the Biden administration, I've argued that we have in America now, we have the two most dangerous organizations in the history of humankind. In that, number one, we've got a Republican Party in the midst of the sixth mass extinction that refuses to admit that climate change is real. Very, very dangerous. So in the long run, they're working to wipe out humankind for all times. But on the other side, we've got, and I call the two parties, in my opinion now, they're both two brainwashed cults. On the other side, we've got the Democrats who are, as the old Bugs Bunny cartoon would be, they're lighting matches in the powder magazine when it comes to Russia, the two countries that have 95% of all nuclear weapons that could, in the blink of an eye, wipe out humankind. And idiots like Dick Durbin are saying, because of some hack that we don't even know who did it. They're not even sure that it was Russia. And this guy's saying this is the equivalent of Pearl Harbor. Now, interesting that everyone could see Pearl Harbor, but for some reason, only the CIA can detect the new Pearl Harbors. But the Democratic Party is playing with matches in that they're pushing for confrontation with both Russia and China, the two nuclear powers. So if the Republican Party doesn't wipe us out in the long run, we won't get to the long run because the idiots in the Democratic Party will wipe us out by nuclear annihilation right now. So that's my argument. We've got two brainwashed cults where the MAGA people or the resistance, there is nothing that their leaders can't tell them at this point, no matter how absurd and unsubstantiated, that they will not mimic, that they will not parrot, that they will not believe immediately. So they're dangerous, brainwashed cults, the two most dangerous in the history of humankind. That's my argument.
I hear you on that one. You know what? That actually provides a pretty neat segue into our next segment. So I'm going to take us out for a slightly early break. We're going to be coming back and talking about Garland Nixon's 3 bold predictions for 2021, looking at the next year. And I think we might have just heard the hint of one of them, but we'll see about that on the other side of this break. You're listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan and Garland Nixon, co-host of The Critical Hour, airing every Monday through Friday right here on Radio Sputnik from 6 to 8 p.m. Eastern. We will be back with Garland on the other side of this break in just a minute.
Fault lines.
Shooting from the lip.
We're taking no prisoners here. Real opinions for real people. Where we bring you people with controversial views, and instead of trying to catch them out, we actually let them expand on their views. What's going on in British politics, European politics, and indeed in world politics as well. And wherever you are, whether you're a UKIP supporter, a Tory or Labour, everything is in turmoil.
John Gaunt.
Shooting from the lip.
Fault lines.
And we're back. You're listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan and Nixon. We're joined by Garland Nixon, Sputnik's political analyst and the co-host of The Critical Hour and Critical Hour Extended, airing Monday through Friday from 6 to 8 p.m. Eastern here on Radio Sputnik. And again, you can and should check out that show. Also follow Garland Nixon on Twitter at Garland Nixon and on Facebook and YouTube. Check him out there too. Garland, let's turn to the future. We're looking at the past, looking back at this crazy year. You started it off, I think, with, if you remember, I believe it was the Puerto Rican earthquake, and then Soleimani. That was the start of 2020, and then it just got worse pretty quickly. That was the past. Turning to the future, are things rosier? Are things grimmer? What do you think is going to happen? Your 3 bold predictions for the coming year.
Donald Trump ain't going away unless the intelligence community rubs him out. That's a possibility. But I mean, let's face it, that's always a possibility with every president from based on what we saw. But so let's go forward with the idea that Donald Trump is safe and healthy and he's able to continue forward doing Trumpian things. What we're seeing right now is interesting. Donald Trump is angry at everyone. He's angry at the Democrats, of course. He's angry at the Republican Party, and it's interesting because he ran in the beginning. Donald Trump ran as the anti-politician. I argued that Donald Trump won because he wasn't a Republican, and then I argue he lost because he became one. He wasn't a Republican, and he said he wanted to do a bunch of things. He came in, and the mainstream Republicans talked him into doing a whole bunch of crap that the people didn't want, and then he lost. So I think Donald Trump, when he's out of office, is going to be sniping at the Democrats based on what we've seen, and the Republicans from the left, from the right, from the center, from any which way he decides. And I think he's going to be very effective at it. I think the mainstream media, Twitter will probably toss him off. We've seen from the Hunter Biden suppression, which would have been my big third story if we'd gotten to that, would have been my third big story for last year. But the Democratic Party and mainstream, I say Democratic, but there's one party with 2 right wings, McConnell, Romney, they're all part of that whole cabal. But they're going to continue to try to do their austerity thing, et cetera. And Donald Trump's going to be sniping at them from every which way. And I think it's going to be very effective. And though there's a lot of things I don't like about Donald Trump, I look forward to it. If the $2,000 stimulus argument and the fact that let's be honest, he selectively picked certain things that he didn't like as pork, where there was a lot more pork. But if that's any indication, I look forward to Donald Trump sniping at the mainstream Republicans and Democrats from every which direction.
Yeah.
So that's number one.
He clearly left out Space Force. He left out toppling of Venezuela, the money they tried to topple Venezuela. Yeah, he left out the things.
Israeli missiles. He left out the Israeli missiles.
Right, the $500 million to Israel, despite them having health insurance. Yeah, he left out the things that he wanted to leave out. But yeah, but he made his point, and it was a very effective video. What else? What's number 2 and number 1?
Here's another one that I think is going to be huge. The intra-party battles in the Democratic Party are really going to blow up. We all know the Jimmy Dore thing, and people talk about it from the perspective of Jimmy Dore, the person. I look at it as in the same way that people talked about Trump, and I said, let's talk about the phenomenon of Trump. What created fertile ground for Donald Trump to become president? When Jimmy Dore said what we've all been discussing, what created the fertile ground for Jimmy Dore's, argument to grow? And we just saw recently Jamal Bowman and Cori Bush were on CNN. They would not commit to voting for Nancy Pelosi. We've got some new people coming in. Joe Biden despises him and his ilk, the Nearitandans. They despise the progressives more than they do the conservatives. They want to make friends with the conservatives, and they want to really just push the progressives right out of their party. And the progressives ain't going to have it that easy. There's going to be, I think there's going to be continued battles, continued wars. And the issue is that the Jamal Bowmans and the Cori Bushes, et cetera, are going to be opposing, big time increases in Pentagon spending and things like that are popular all across the aisle. So the Democratic Party, they're going to have some real trouble, and there's going to be some blowups inside that party, I believe, with a Joe Biden and Kamala Harris, who are absolute puppets for Wall Street and the warmongers and big tech running it.
And so are you optimistic then about progressives' ability to assert themselves within the Democratic Party? Because I'll just add this on before I hand it over to you. I think you are absolutely right. I think they created the conditions, they created the seeds of their own destruction. And the progressives are the natural enemies of establishment Democrats far more than the conservatives are, because the conservatives and the Democrats, the Republicans and the Democrats rather, are sort of existentially dependent on each other as enemies. Whereas you have a potential for a real enmity, a real sort of displacement of the establishment within the DNC by progressive upstarts, effectively by progressive insurgents. Do you see that actually happening, or do you think that's just gonna be a flash in the pan? What we're seeing right now, Garland, what do you see?
Well, it's going to kind of tear at the foundations of the Democratic Party. A party, all parties are coalitions of groups that come together, and skilled politicians hold those coalitions together. And if the Democratic Party loses their progressive coalition, they're not going to be effective as a national party if they lose a big chunk of their coalition. So it'll be interesting to watch, and again, Trump sniping from all different directions. The coalitions that hold the two parties together could start to unravel. Will the Democratic Party, are they going to wake up tomorrow and turn into, the party of Eugene Debs or something? Not the, or FDR. Let's go a little bit of FDR. No, that's not going to happen. They are who they are. But I think the parties will start to, coalitions will start to unravel. I think that's what we're going to see.
Interesting. I don't know. I mean, I thought that with the Sanders thing. I thought that with 2016 and 2020. And yet you had the overwhelming majority of lefties vote Biden. And more importantly, Cornel West. And I like to use Cornel West as an example, because Cornel West is the radical of the bunch. He's the wild hair. I'm not going to, be tamed and everything else. Very strong. Love the guy. And that guy, despite working with the People's Party and everything else, despite being on Dore's show multiple times, he knuckled under and voted for Joe Biden. Now, he had to take a shower after that, a steam bath after that. Whatever he had to do, he made that vote. My point is, if you can get Cornel West to vote for Joe Biden, then the mechanism has already been established that Joe Biden can pee in all of these people's cereal. And they will still eat that cereal, and they will still vote for Joe Biden. That's where I think the left is. Now, I understand that there are going to be some rowdy left coming into Congress. But AOC was rowdy once. AOC was against voting for Pelosi when she first got in office. So why am I to believe that after a year in Congress where these guys get into the business of congressing, that they also won't be subdued. Democratic Party is where movement goes to die. So what is giving you, let's say, what's the word I'm looking for? Optimism. That the same thing is not going to happen to them, that they're not going to be subdued, that the woke crowd using blacks as props and using progressives as props is not just going to be the prevailing win, and these guys just basically get folded into the party structure. I mean, they thought the moment that Biden gets elected, that the left and everything else would just go to sleep because they'll just get ignored. What do you think about that? Well, do you think they're going to get ignored, or do you think they're going to be rowdy?
A couple of things, and where I think a couple of these people are different, particularly Bush and Cory Bush and Bowman, is this. Look at Bolivia. Where is the strength of a political movement? A political movement that comes out of a social movement is is much more powerful. It has a foundation. It has an anchor, right? A moral compass. Both of them come out of kind of the streets. Both of them come out of social movements. So they're not inured to. They're not going to be in the same way as inured to the political parties. The other thing that I think that's going to happen, and this is, maybe a little bit of a different prediction, severe social unrest, violence, etc., kind of an unraveling of the social fabric of the U.S. as a result of the neoliberal austerity. This argument right now that you can't give $2,000 to, you can't give $2,000 a person, that $600 is good enough, and according to Larry Summers, that's too good for the peasants. I think, when the kinds of things we're going to see happen socially with hunger, with evictions, with severe economic consequences from the pandemic and the neoliberal austerity imposed as a result of the pandemic is going to cause major problems. Let's not forget, people have argued for years in the Middle East that one of the reasons that you have terrorism is because of the economic pain. And when you've got a lot of young men who are out of work, who are angry at their government, angry at their circumstances, it's easily to recruit them into movements of violence. Well, the U.S. is going to see exactly the same thing. And I think that's going to have a significant effect on politics and of people. It's going to, I think, kind of drive a lot of politicians, particularly the new ones, to pick a side. As the old school politicians, how they react to any social pushback with violence. They're going to say, we got to go crush these people. We got to go destroy them. That's going to be their move. They're going to have, Kamala Harris is the queen of Silicon Valley. They've got their person in there. We're going to throw them off Twitter, et cetera. And so it'll be interesting to watch how some of the newer politicians react to that. So those I think those two things are going to kind of simultaneously work together to create an environment for some political change. And I'm not saying it's good or bad change, but I think there'll be significant political changes as a result of that. And it may, as I said, it may just be that the coalitions that hold the two parties together start to unravel.
And of course, this time it will be under a Biden administration. In 2020, massive unrest like you were talking about. That was during the Trump administration. He effectively had the entire media, in large part. I mean, they were pushing back on the protests, but they were also pushing back on him. He had a kind of hemming in process that was going on where he didn't declare martial law, was certainly aggressive in a bunch of cases. I think it's going to be entirely different during a Biden administration. And there will be some pushback, but it's not going to be so universal. This might tie in with what you were talking about progressives, the breaking down of coalitions on the left, and a sort of reshaping of left-wing politics. Because if you have Biden being harsher than Trump ever was, and the progressive left calling him out on this, rightfully so, saying you were worse than Trump ever was, you're being more brutal than Trump ever was. If you're right about the coming social unrest and potential for violence in the streets, that kind of thing, how do you see that playing out? Do you see that, being a part of this? What do you think the Biden administration will do in response to this coming unrest that you see happening, Garland?
Oh, there's no question in my mind that they will do. That's what the system does. The system responds with violence, and Joe Biden will do that. He's going to get some pushback. But see, the thing about the media is this. Now the media is a wholly owned subsidiary of the mainstream Democratic Party of the Biden people. They were in fact absolutely involved in election interference in getting Biden in. Regarding the Hunter Biden, suppression of the Hunter Biden stuff. So they'll actually be forced to cover this, and they will be exposed also. One other thing. Oh, I forgot. A huge one before we go. Huge. The grenade that Donald Trump really left for Joe Biden is Julian Assange. Because Julian Assange, if they get him over here, which they probably will, Joe Biden is going to have to deal with, for instance, the ACLU, which was considered, legally the foundation of the resistance, like 300 or 400 lawsuits filed against the Trump administration. Huge. I mean, it grew. The ACLU is now bigger than the NRA. This huge organization who has already said, we're going to fight you on Assange. You got some of the major, a lot of people in the media who are going to be afraid that they're going to be the next Assange. Biden is going to get pushback from inside his own tent on Assange, and that ain't going to be, that it's going to cause a lot of uproar. So Assange is going to be a big one if he gets here, if unfortunately they don't get to rub him out and, claim it's COVID or something, which apparently they're trying to do in Belmarsh.
Very interesting. You know what? I think you're right. That will be something that comes up. We're going to have to come back to that. Garland, thank you for joining us.
All right. Thank you.
For those listening, that was Garland Nixon, Sputnik political analyst and the co-host of the Critical Hour and Critical Hour Extended, airing right here on Radio Sputnik every Monday through Friday from 6 to 8 p.m. Eastern. Follow Garland Nixon on Twitter at Garland Nixon, also on Facebook and on YouTube. You're listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. We'll be back in just a minute with headlines in the last hour of today's show.
Listening to Radio Sputnik. Telling the untold.
Fault lines.
Live from across the divided states of America, it is time for our last hour this morning of the most disruptive show, covering news across our states as well as across the fragmented surface of our globe. In the independent corner, I am your political analyst, Shane Stranahan.
And in the left corner, I am the indefatigable, the last man on the wall, your political analyst, Jamarl Thomas.
And together we are Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. All right, let's get into the headlines. First up in COVID news, at least 3,626 new coronavirus deaths and 200,902 new cases were reported in the United States yesterday. I'm just going to highlight that again. 3,626 new coronavirus deaths. That's big. That's one of the biggest numbers we've seen, one of the largest daily death tolls we have seen so far. If you remember, back in, June, I believe it was, when 2,000 deaths a day seemed significant, and it was, of course. This is bigger than that, almost double that. Over the past week, there's been an average of 183,030 cases per day, a decrease of 11% from the average 2 weeks earlier. State health officials in Colorado announced Tuesday they had identified America's first confirmed case of a fast-spreading COVID-19 variant, first identified in the United Kingdom. Colorado officials said the case had been identified by the state's public health laboratory in a male in his 20s with, quote, no travel history, end quote. That appears to indicate that there is now community spread of this new variant, which many people are saying is a faster spreading variant, potentially much faster. And with unabated community spread, if it's spreading much faster, it will do that. And at this point, we've lost the potential to cap it off. Although, frankly, I'm not sure that we ever had a chance with that anyway. Britain on Wednesday became the first country in the world to approve a coronavirus vaccine developed by Oxford University and AstraZeneca. The country has ordered 100 million doses of that vaccine. Back in the U.S., a recently elected U.S. lawmaker, Republican Luke Letlow, 41 years old, has died from COVID-19, again at the age of just 41. He was elected as representative for Louisiana's 5th District and was due to be sworn in on Sunday. He announced his positive coronavirus test on December 18th, was admitted to the hospital on the 19th, then the ICU on the 23rd, and finally died yesterday on the 29th. So 11 days there from diagnosis to death. Sad state of affairs. Yesterday, Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell blocked an attempt by Senate Minority Leader Chuck Schumer to unanimously approve a House-passed bill to increase direct payments in the coronavirus relief package to $2,000 from $600. The Kentucky Republican later in the day introduced a bill that would boost the size of the checks to $2,000 from $600, repeal Section 230 legal liability protections for internet platforms, and create a commission to study election issues. The bill would meet all of President Donald Trump's recent demands, but again, Democrats won't go for it. This is just Jamarl, what was your take on this earlier? I see this as a dirty politics. And I'll be honest, I've looked at this from a couple of different angles, but I don't see the simple motive here other than not giving Democrats a win. But what's your take, Jamarl?
You mean the pushing back from McConnell?
Yes.
I just don't think McConnell, from my standpoint, I don't think leaders, be it McConnell or Pelosi, wants to put their people out to make a vote that is unpopular. And if you have the material needs of the American public, $2,000, very clear. This is not, do you want to pay this, and abortion, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. No. This is very simple. Do you want to give the American public $2,000 for their pain and misery for everything that has been going on? And to have his members.
Unpopular with whom? Well, you said unpopular. You're talking about unpopular with the American people or the Republican Party?
If you're basically telling people, no, I don't want to up $600 to $2,000. Well, people are going to know that. Like, this is not 5 different things. This is very specific. Do you want to increase the amount of money that you're going to get to the American population? Yes or no? And if the senators say no to that, that looks bad, especially if they have to go out and get votes.
But here's where I'm going to play dumb here through this whole thing. I get what you're saying there. So McConnell's throwing this other stuff in because it's not going to get passed, and that way he can say that he's in favor of the $2,000 thing, but he also has these other demands. And the Democrats just aren't willing to go for that. But here's the thing. Wouldn't it leave him pretty popular too? If he was like, if everybody just passed this thing through and everybody said a kumbaya, like, wouldn't that be good for everybody in Congress, because you'd have potentially public trust going up, less likely of a coup? I mean,
but they're ideologically against it. If that was the case, they would have already did it. They could have did the 2,000. Democrats could have fought for 2,000. Clearly, they could have fought for 2,000. They got it past the House. They just didn't do it. I'm saying that these guys are ideologically against this stuff, and he doesn't want to put his people up for a vote like that. I think honestly, I really think that's the beginning and end of it. Him putting this out is just a way of saying, all right, fair enough. If you want your 2,000, let's get rid of this communication stuff, something that I know as a flat fact you're not going to do. It's like, I give you the 2,000, but I need your firstborn. Well, wait a minute, I'm not going to give you my firstborn. Then you don't really want the 2,000 then. I mean, it's a stupid argument. It's like, either give the people $2,000 or not. And he just doesn't want to do it. He knows his Republicans don't want to do it. I mean, these are the guys that are trying to take away health care. Let's be very clear. These are the guys that are trying to get rid of Social Security. You think they want to give $2,000 to the American public? They don't. And by the way, I don't even think most Democrats do. I think the shame of it all.
And do you think that's ideological too?
I think it's ideological. Do you think Joe Manchin really wants to give $2,000 to people in West Virginia? No, I don't.
And why do you think? Where do you think what within that ideology is telling them that this is not feasible? This is a bad idea.
Because I think it's a few things. I think part of it is this ideology of wealth, this ideology of where they come with this weird thing of moral hazard in this kind of bizarre fashion. I think they look at wealth in a particular lens, and I think they look at that lens as they are deserving of this. The American public is not. I think a lot of goes into it. I think the thought of, if you do this and provide this for the American public, it makes it clear that the American public, or that this can be done for the public itself. This notion of safety nets. I think all of this stuff. I think we put people in Congress so often that they're just not used to fighting for the American public, because the American public doesn't necessarily force them to do that. I think a lot of stuff goes into it, but I think a lot of this is just ideology. Like when Mark Frost, when he would start off, he was saying, look, I know this is ideological, now an ideological position on this, etc. And he would start from there. Why does AOC want people to get more? Why does Bernie Sanders want people to get more? I mean, it's the same reason on some part of why the other people don't want them to get more. Some of this really does boil down to ideological differences in the way they believe the public should pursue themselves. I think they're just against it. And I think that's sad they're against it, because these would be the same people who will pass a tax cut in a heartbeat. Like, why are they so for tax cuts, but not for this stuff? You see what I mean? Like, there's an ideological bend in this that goes against public interest, and that needs to change. How is this in any way a representative government when you have 88% of Democrats saying we want Medicare for all, and the party, House, Senate, President basically says kick rocks? How does it representative when 74% of the American public, all the American public, say, yeah, we want this? And your office holders tell you to kick rocks. I mean, I can go down the list. It doesn't even have to just be Medicare for all. I'm saying, how is this a representative government if the things that the public wants are not found within the context of the government in regards to any real level of representation? It's not. And so, like, you know, I don't think it's unfair to ask why these guys aren't for this, but I also think it's unfair to, I think it's fair to say, why aren't they for this? In the way that you're framing the question, why aren't they for this? This seems to be a great deal.
I mean, I'll put it like this: if we're going to use the metaphor of the idea that the state is a ship, we're all on board this ship of state. The way that they patch up the holes in the ship with money, the holes, the nature of those holes are the potential for economic collapse through the stock market collapsing, and the potential for our foreign empire to collapse through, you know, all of our overseas military extent to have to pull back for a variety of reasons. And that was a large part of why the pushback on Donald Trump was so strong, but that's an aside. And it's worth spending their money on that stuff. It's worth spending their money, you know, giving money to big banks, effectively, you know, through quantitative easing or debt buybacks, whatever, debt monetization. It's easy in these different ways. It's expedient for them to keep the economy afloat. That's valuable. And of course, they need to keep sending money overseas to our allies and half allies and frenemies, whatever, because that keeps the ship floating. The fact that people are starving on board this ship and have like cholera and are having to eat each other is not quite as relevant. Now, there is a hidden like gem in there in a weird way, which is, or there's another way of looking at this, which is if the ship of state goes down, then it's going to be bad for all of us too. So in some sense, we're all sort of not complicit in it, but we're all benefiting from that. On the other hand, though, I think we do a lot better if we sort of stabilize things in some other way. If we were able to pull back and, I don't know, maybe downsize to a slightly smaller ship, maybe use some of the planks that we, you know, built on for luxury purposes and use those to fix the cracks or something like that. The metaphor starts to break down at this point. But I think that's broadly the thing. The where they're spending the money and the sort of austerity policy matched by crazy outflows of cash to the economy, to the stock market, to businesses, and to overseas governments and our military. That's not accidental. It's par for the course. But the course that we're maintaining on that ship is problematic, to say the least. I don't know. What's your take on that?
Keep in mind, Donald Trump gave tax cuts. He gave tax cuts that were so grotesque that it basically raised taxes on the middle class and the poor to give to the rich. And this is already after, you know, like decades of money basically being siphoned from the poor and the middle class to the rich. It wasn't an act of God. These were policies. And the policies make all the sense in the world. If 90% of the income gains go to the top 1%, or 90% of the races are won by the side with the most cash, if you are a politician and you know that, where do you lean? You lean to the cash. I mean, like, it's the most natural thing in the world. In one situation after the next, it makes all the sense in the world that if the people who are giving you tons and tons of cash, and you know that that cash is used to win those races, then where do you lean? Are you going to lean to people without it and people who seem to be detached from the political space? My argument is you have dollars or pitchforks. And for the longest time, you've only had dollars. The pitchforks haven't necessarily made themselves available, in which case the politicians naturally, rationally lean to the side with the cash, especially if it can get unconditional support by masses that are not represented and yet vote for them anyway. So, yeah, I think a lot of this stuff is ideological. I think a lot of it is just natural going in the direction that you believe is most beneficial, especially if there's no consequence for it. And unfortunately, I don't think Joe Biden is going to be better for that. I think Joe Biden, in a weird way, is going to make that worse. I think because it gets quiet at that point. Their belief is that all of these lefties and everything else, when Biden is in, is going to shut up. That the Democrats are going to tell those lefties to shush, and that they're not going to want that this kind of back and forth. I think that's exactly what's going to happen. When AOC basically says, yeah, you know, I'm not going to push, etc., I think after a while, these guys get into their headspace. And so I'm not confident with a Biden presidency. I think he's going to get along with Mitch McConnell extraordinarily well. Mitch McConnell retains the Senate. And I think that is the worst case scenario. I don't think that's the best case scenario.
There will definitely be a lot of fighting on the surface. Here's the thing, though, man. I'm going to call it. Those are headlines. You're listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. Just because, we're having this conversation. Here's the thing, though. You get a president, and say you have we were talking about Garland, with the potential for a realignment on the back end of the Democratic Party, maybe more progressive influence, that kind of thing. But what you have, and I'll just lay out a couple of the ways in which this works. You have a persistent state behind the presidency, behind the White House, distributed throughout the State Department, just the federal government as a whole, the DOD, obviously the Pentagon, through think tanks, through sort of black books, intelligence agencies, all over the place. You have this large core of people with ideas about how things are supposed to be done. They are effectively in a kind of ideological gridlock with each other and, holding our system in place. What breaks that down? That's where the thing is for people. I don't think the United States is, Tom Luongo the other day saying the United States is going to split up into different countries within the next 15 years. No, I don't believe that's the case, merely because there's too much stagnation. There's too much sort of sclerosis holding the thing together. But of course, that same sclerosis keeps us from fixing it and having any chance of thriving in the long run. What difference is and this is the horrible cynicism that comes with it, with this massive overbuilt bureaucracy, what difference does any of it make? It's like, changing the rudder on the ship by half a degree when we're almost inevitably sailing, to our demise. Jamarl, what's your take?
Yeah,
we got to close it out. But.
Yeah, I think it's nonsense. The breaking up stuff. I don't buy that. I don't think the country has it in it. At least not currently. I mean, not that I've seen. Don't get me wrong. Strife, complaining, yes, but the breaking up is something fundamentally different that I have a hard time believing that either members of government or the public itself is on board for or would be down for.
Here's the thing. Texas talks about secession. California talks about secession. They talk about it. Do you think that's just talk? What's your take?
Yeah, I think it's just talk. I mean, Texas talks about secession for 20 years. They just talk. I've heard California talk about breaking up into like 3 sections because it's so huge. I've heard all that stuff. But at the end of the day, we had a war for the very same reasons about people trying to secede from the Union. Whether they would have a war today, I'm doubtful. But I just don't know if there's any real impetus in the country from the standpoint of the citizenry or the governmental bodies to do that. I don't see that at all. I just don't buy it. But let's do this. So we can talk about it.
Yeah, let's go to a break.
Yeah, we can talk about it later. This is Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. We'll be back in a moment.
Fault Lines. 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. We give you the most essential information out there. Radio Sputnik, telling the untold.
Feeling kind of blue, but maybe also kind of red, and kind of purple, and kind of alone? You've got a friend on Radio Sputnik. Tune into Political Misfits from 12 to 2 Eastern Time, Monday through Friday, for news, politics, and culture without the two-party bias. Catch us daily on 105.5 in Washington, D.C., or 102.9 or 104.7 in Kansas City. Or find us on Twitter, Facebook, YouTube, Spotify, or wherever you get your news.
Fault Lines.
And we're back. You're listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan and Honigman. We are joined by Dr. Bill Honigman, retired emergency room physician, progressive healthcare activist, and national outreach director at progressivedemocratsofamerica.org. Dr. Bill, Dr. Honigman, I should say, thank you for joining us. How are you doing this morning?
I am doing fine, thanks. And Dr. Bill is fine, or just Bill. Good to be with you.
Hey, thank you for joining us again. Thanks for coming back on. All right, let's get into a conversation here. I'm actually going to start out with the Force the Vote movement. I'm sure you've seen this, of course. I'm sure you've been following this. Big infighting on the left, largely between the Jimmy Dore crowd, and I don't even know how to define that, but between Jimmy Dore and friends and colleagues and the Young Turks crowd. As far as I can tell, if I had to put it that simply, it would be between those two communities of folks on the left. What's your take on this issue? Which side do you fall on? And what do you think about the actual movement, the idea to force the vote, the idea that progressives in Congress should withhold their vote for Nancy Pelosi as Speaker of the House unless she puts a Medicare for All bill on the floor of the House? What's your take on all that stuff, Dr. Bill?
Well, first of all, I'm a big fan of Jimmy Dore. I think he's a terrific comedian, but I disagree with him on the strategy, and and maybe because I'm an old time lefty politico myself, and not in the sense that that I'm like a poli-sci type politico. I'm just a political junkie, and and a healthcare person, a healthcare professional. And what we've been doing to force the vote for years now is to try and raise awareness and engage the electorate over the issue. So, for the example of healthcare and forcing a vote, which is really what our aim is to force a vote on Medicare for All in the House of Representatives. What we need to really do is to get more and more co-sponsors for the National Medicare for All Act that's being put forward nowadays by our lead champion, which is Pramila Jayapal in the House, and of course Bernie Sanders in the Senate. So it's in terms of strategy, it just doesn't work to try and get the sponsors who are already with us on this issue to force the House leadership to change as much as to bring on board additional co-sponsors by pressuring them in their home districts. So that's really what we need to do. I mean, if 88% of Democrats nationwide are in favor of Medicare for all, well, then we need to go to 90%, 95%, 98% of Democrats nationwide in favor of Medicare for all. I mean, we have 118 co-sponsors. Anyone who ran on Medicare for all won their seat. They were reelected to the House. It's the ones who weren't in favor of Medicare for all, the Democrats who didn't win their seats back. So that's the way we force the vote, by getting more co-sponsors, not by challenging.
Dr. Bill, welcome to the show. I think the point that people would make is that if you have 88% support, that is near unanimous support, and getting 90% support, it's just 2% difference. It's not going to make a difference when the leadership doesn't even agree with you. Meaning, just because you have the optics of people who put their name to something, that's not the same thing as getting a vote on it. I think the people would argue, or I would even argue, is that if you've been doing this for years and you have 88% support, something's not working. And that the issue becomes the use of leverage. Meaning, when you work on something for years and you realize that you've developed that much support, 88% support, you're in the middle of a pandemic, you have 20 million people, give or take, that are infected, 300,000, more than 300,000 have died, and you still can't get the Democratic Party to represent the interests of not just Democrats, but the majority of the public, since 70-something% support Medicare for all. I would wager, and I would point out that Jimmy Dore will probably say, and many of the people that support the strategy, that you guys are doing something wrong. It's not so much that the policy is wrong, it's that the leadership and the Democrats, let's just say, have a different base that gives them all sorts of cash, that gives them all sorts of money, that gives them all sorts of incentives to not back that policy, and that becoming more aggressive, especially using leverage to try to effectuate or effect a change in regards to the way leadership thinks about this and to put pressure on them, is a positive step. Now, what is wrong with that? Meaning, I understand that you don't like it per se, but what is the negative in doing that? Considering that for the most part, progressives have, I mean, for God's sake, the DSCC and the DCCC were literally blackballing lefties, or blackballing organizations that would assist lefties getting in office, meaning stopping people like Ilhan Omar, AOC, the Bowmans of the world from even getting elected in the first place. So what is the downside, considering that they have been doing everything in their power to undermine lefties and progressives anyway, and you do have 88% support? What's the downside in pushing for this and using leverage in this way?
Well, I agree with you 100%, Marl. And in fact, I mean, you are making my point. What you haven't said is what is the pressure point? You know, when we talk about leverage, think about, you know, like a seesaw on a playground, okay? That point of leverage that makes the seesaw operate is what they call a fulcrum, right? So where is the fulcrum in this situation that we're talking about? Is it at the point of the leadership's office, or is it at the point of the district office where you can actually, you know, make a difference? You can hold town hall meetings, you can hold forums, you can raise awareness, you can actually talk to people who are on board, and people can go to their district office and say, hey, this is something we want, and can work for candidates who will challenge those who aren't on board. So that's the difference here. We're looking at what is the pressure point. You know, is it challenging Nancy Pelosi in her district? Well, no, the problem there is that once they gain power in their leadership position, then the people in that district even are reluctant to vote against it because they feel they have somebody in a position of power that they're not willing to remove just because she's not 100% on board with Medicare for all. So, you know, so that's again more difficult. What is not difficult is winning hearts and minds on this issue. That's why the numbers have you know steadily gone up on the issue of Medicare for all, and will continue to do so. You know, look, I'm not being Pollyanna about this. You know, the fact is, we've been saying right from the beginning, and even before, as climate scientists have predicted more pandemics and worse pandemics. And, you know, Joe Biden is telling us now that you can expect another 100,000 dead from COVID this next month alone. You know, that things are going to get worse before they get better. And when Fox News does an exit poll in November that says that 70% of people want a government-run healthcare system, and that COVID-19 is the perfect reason why, you know, that more and more people are going to get on board.
But that's my point, Dr. Bill.
That pressure point is going to go right to Nancy Pelosi and all of the rest of the members of Congress who are not yet on board.
But that's my point. Don't you have to strike while the iron is hot? And I understand you're asking what's the fulcrum. The fulcrum works in two parts. Yes, in one part, Pelosi with the left finally using leverage of Pelosi. Pelosi is a capitalist. She understands that if you want something, you got to pay for it. And in this case, the payment for it is the vote for Medicare for all. She says, we're capitalists. All right, fair enough. Let her be a capitalist. Let her pay for that vote by putting it up. And I guess my point is the same pressure that is being used right now, where Sanders is basically shaming these guys trying to get $2,000, and how it passed the House is the exact same pressure that is being used here. In one sense, Pelosi wants a seat, the pressure point in that one. She wants a seat, put up the vote. But on the other one, it's you're in the middle of a pandemic. You have 74% of the public, not just Democrats, that back the policy, make your vote. And if they want to vote against it, fine. But they're going to have their name on the list where people can run against them that are for Medicare for all. My point is, if Medicare for all really is that popular, and the left really believes it's that popular, then you should want Democrats putting their name for a vote in the House where you can run against those Democrats if they're against it. And what I suspect is that a lot of those Democrats will vote for the policy because they are in a pandemic, and there are 88% of Democrats that back it, and it is 74% of the public that supports it. And for an individual to write and say, no, I do not believe that America should get health care, I think that is a very difficult vote, and that's a difficult vote that I want them to make. What do you think about that? I mean, do you believe that that's not leverage in and of itself for the person to have to make a vote on something that basically is dramatically popular?
No. Again, I have to agree with you. And in fact, as a Bernie Sanders delegate, you know, going into the Democratic National Convention this last summer, we were asking them to, you know, pass the damn bill, right? That was our hashtag, pass the damn bill. You know, we were asking for exactly that. We wanted a floor vote. The question is a question of strategy. Do you go after House leadership as opposed to House membership? And that's what we're talking about. We want all the House members to step up and co-sponsor and force it to go through committee. So we challenged people like, for example, Richard Neal, who's chair of the House Ways and Means Committee, with a substantial challenge for his race. And, if I were Nancy Pelosi, I'd be looking at, is Richie Neal really all that secure in his position? Because he had a formidable challenge, primary challenge in his race for his seat. And many Democrats have had to, they've been removed from their committee chair positions because of those types of challenges. So that's what we're talking about. We want to force the vote by getting more and more co-sponsors and challenging those Democrats who are not willing to go along with the vast majority of Democrats nationwide.
Fair enough. And just think, we can actually sit here and talk about this in a decent way without screaming and, saying bad things about each other. I have to be honest, I've been very disheartened by finding this conversation online. I mean, the things that people have been saying about each other has been a little bit disturbing to me, because I think it's a conversation about a tactic. And I think, insofar it doesn't go beyond that. And yet I think it has. I also think that a lot of the energy and the stress and the angst that's been about this is because I think progressives have felt like they haven't had an outlet. That basically they won all of these arguments when Sanders was running in the primary. And then you get a Biden presidency where one creature after the next is put into these various positions. Meaning despite winning the argument, there's no way to accentuate that, to express that in any real political context. And I think that just ends up with energy being frittered in all of these other ways and frustration. Let's do this. Let's take a break. We're going to bring you back. This is Dr. Bill Honigman, retired emergency room physician, progressive healthcare activist, and national outreach director at progressivedemocratsforamerica.org. You can follow Dr. Bill on Twitter at Dr. Bill H and Progressive Democrats for America at pdamerica.org. You guys are listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. We will be back in a moment.
Fault Lines. We are talking
24 hours a day, 7 days a week.
You are listening.
We give you the most essential out of the endless information space.
Radio Sputnik, telling the untold.
Stuck in traffic? No problem. Stay informed. Stay tuned to Radio Sputnik on 105.5 FM or 1390 AM in the Washington, D.C. area. Need more? Follow us on Facebook or check us out on SputnikNews.com.
Fault Lines.
And we're back. You're listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan and our guest, Dr. Bill Honigman. He is a retired emergency room physician, progressive healthcare activist, and national outreach director at Progressive Democrats of America.org. Find them at pdamerica.org. Dr. Bill, thank you again for being with us. Thank you for having that conversation. Let's switch topics very slightly. Let's talk about the stimulus bill, or bills, I should say. Specifically the $600 to $2,000 revision and the sort of back and forth with McConnell's response to that coming out in the last day, and Bernie Sanders holding the veto of holding the McConnell's override of the veto by Trump of the NDAA on the line as his version of leverage and trying to get the $2,000 raise into place. What's your take on this whole set of events, just broadly, Dr. Bill, looking at this? Do you think $2,000 is too much? Do you think it's not enough? Do you think it's just right? And what do you think of the politics about actually getting that raise through?
Well, thanks. Great to be on with you. And I'm still feeling the burn. I don't know about you, but it's great to see Bernie in action, of course. And, a lot of people say he should be in the Biden cabinet. How could you want him away from the Senate when he can be so effective? This really is Bernie's not me, us agenda, right? So he's putting out there that $600 relief check is woefully inadequate. $2,000 is getting closer, and I think, I don't know about you, I'm hearing reports that around the world, most developed countries are giving on the order of $2,000 per month to most people as relief during this time. So they don't seem to be worried about accruing deficits in the other advanced countries around the world. I mean, that like minimum wage, these relief dollars go right back into the economy. It supports essential businesses and those jobs, protects those at risk who have to stay home because they have increased risk for COVID. I mean, it really is the age-old argument of kind of Keynesian versus Milton Friedman type austerity economics, right? So that you've got the 40 years of Nixon, Reagan, Bush experiment of austerity economics that are really the reluctance of the Republicans and a lot of the corporate Democrats is that if you give people a handout, they won't work. They won't go to work, and the problem there is you end up with more handouts really to the rich. We end up with corporate welfare, oligarchy, aristocracy, and 360,000 COVID deaths. So clearly that's not working. And then finally, you got Bernie Sanders using this as a strategy for the Georgia runoffs, because this is drawing a line in the sand over, the re-election of two very, very corporate GOP senators in Georgia, and they're even having to draw a line between themselves and their own leadership, and making this vote about McConnell versus Warnock and Ossoff. So I think this is brilliant.
Yeah, I think it's brilliant too. I thought the exact same way. I mean, because basically Loeffler and the two Republicans, but Loeffler and Perdue, are basically having to say, yeah, we're for the 2000. They're not. Like, under normal circumstances, can you ever believe that these crooked Republicans that were basically using their position to get for market stuff, that these guys would be for 2000? No, it's because they're basically put on the spot where they're trying to get elected. And they know that if they say, no, we're not for the 2000, that they would have political consequences. And also, there's another thing for this. If Democrats take the House, Sanders is going to be put into a powerful position in the Senate. Sanders knows it. Meaning, like, all of this is a win-win from the political standpoint of Sanders getting recognition and for Sanders putting a line in the sand, like you say, for the two, basically the Democrat, I think it's Ossoff and Warnock, who are trying to take the seats. I'm curious, if Biden, or let's say if Democrats take the Senate, what changes? Like, and this sounds like a counterintuitive, but do you believe that Biden would prefer a McConnell Senate, or do you believe he would prefer a Schumer Senate? You know why I'm asking that. You know exactly why I'm asking that. Because I think these guys agree more than I think people realize. But what do you think?
See, here I thought I was being too cynical by pointing out that things are going to get worse before they get better. No, I think that Biden would absolutely have to welcome a Schumer Senate. I mean, Schumer is probably his best buddy. Number one, coming from the Senate the way he has, but there's vast more possibility, even if it's for incremental change. I mean, wouldn't we love big sweeping change, the kind of change we really need, like Medicare for all and the Green New Deal? absolutely. But under McConnell's Senate, at that point, it's reduced to executive orders, right? And you can see how limited that's going to be altogether. And you don't have to look back very far. You can just look at what Obama was not able to do for the majority of his 2 terms in the office under that kind of situation. So I think even if, especially if Biden's looking at only a single term and then turning it over to another Democrat, he wants to make a difference. He wants to really make an imprint in his time in office, and he can only do that if he gets the Senate.
But what I admit, I'm slightly skeptical of that. And by the way, you were saying, things will get worse before they get better. I think the general tenor around here is that things will get worse before they get even worse. I think that's kind of where we're sitting. And that would hold for Biden, too. What kind of imprint do you think he wants to leave, assuming for a second that he's only planning on doing 1 term in the Oval Office there?
I think this is a kind of a fundamental error in that some people, especially those of us on the left, who think that there is not a difference really between corporate Democrats and corporate Republicans. For example, I think Biden, as a corporate Democrat, does see himself as a progressive in the sense that he wants to make at least incremental progress. He wants to make some progress, like Obama, for example, felt that the Affordable Care Act was some progress. So Biden, I think, sees himself very similarly, wants to make some progress. That's the kind of thing I think that Joe Biden thinks would be a favorable impression. Now, is that adequate in the face of, the 6th mass extinction? No, obviously it's not. So that's why we're pushing for much, much more, and we will. We'll continue to push him. And that's what it meant to lose the primary, to Joe Biden when we would have preferred Bernie Sanders in office at this point. So, that's the kind of thing we're talking about.
I'm curious. When Sanders lost that race, the entire time the primary was going on, I never saw it as a 20-person race. I saw it as basically one person, meaning Sanders, versus the entire structure of the Democratic Party. Because exactly what happened was my thinking of this stuff. That basically, when it got down to crunch time, when it got down to like South Carolina, and Chris Matthews is freaking out, and because Chris Matthews gets it, Sanders doesn't take it just for 1 term, he takes it for a generation. And you had the party basically collapse. The New York Times article surrounding this is awesome. There's like, this is really uncharacteristic of the way politics goes to have these guys just get out the party like that. Well, yeah, because they were very clear from an ideological standpoint, we don't want this guy. What did you think about that when you were watching that? And you were watching from the standpoint, look, I'm not a Democrat. And so I look at this slightly differently. But as a Democrat and watching what seemed to be basically the party collapse to stop him from exceeding, how did you view that? I mean, when FDR made this argument that he did this to save capitalism, it seemed at the very least he had this understanding of, at sometimes you have to give things back, especially in dire situations if you want to preserve the system and the integrity of the system. It doesn't seem like they have that. How did you view all of that? The surrounding thing. Like you say, you were feeling the burn. I was definitely feeling the burn. So I had some definitely feelings about it.
Yeah, I think FDR is a good case in point. I think he probably was a progressive Democrat, like I see myself, where when he got in office, he said, now make me do these things, right? So in that admission, he was saying that, hey, if nobody's pushing me, then I'm not going to be able to take this thing further because he's being pushed from the other side, kind of thing. So as long as I've been involved, which is goes back as far as walking precincts in my neighborhood in Southern California for Eugene McCarthy when I was 14 years old in 1968. I have felt as much on the outside as on the inside of the Democratic Party. And there are lots of progressive Democrats. I mean, it wasn't just, Bernie Sanders, that's for sure. There's terrific people like Ro Khanna and Pramila Jayapal, lots of terrific progressive Democrats out there. So and you don't have to be a Democrat to support those progressive Democrats. So that's what we're talking about here is the influence on our government and how we bring to bear that influence. And it's like I said in the last segment, it's in continuing to raise awareness, to engage the electorate, to change hearts and minds, let people see there are solutions to the problems like the pandemic, like the sixth mass extinction. How are we going to grapple with these issues? How should we be dealing with these things? The progressive agenda has those things, those solutions, and we just need to continue to bring that out so people are made aware.
Dr. Bill, thank you for joining us. Yeah. We're about out of time, but Dr. Bill Honigman, thank you for joining us. He is a retired emergency room physician, progressive healthcare activist, and National Outreach Director at Progressive Democrats of America. You can follow him on Twitter at Dr. Bill H. and check out Progressive Democrats of America at pdamerica.org. You're listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. We will be back in a minute. We're taking calls. 202-521-1320 is the number. 202-521-1320. Again, taking your calls on the other side of this break. We'll be right back.
Fault Lines.
Every day we ask questions.
How is Facebook going to prevent suicides?
Well, do you see this as being a human rights violation?
Are the cows really stinking up the planet that much?
To move ideas forward.
A gravitational wave is a ripple in the fabric of space and time.
I don't think the launch of the satellite proves anything at all.
Where do good ideas come from? We connect with independent thinkers, hear their ideas, and create stimulating debates on real issues.
The Dow is in a correction. As I said, commodities across the globe are collapsing. Why is that the case? Because we are in a global recession.
That is set to change because Iran has approximately about 50 million barrels, which it had put in storage during the height of the sanctions regime, and that's ready to be released as soon as possible.
Where is the money?
The super rich individuals and the world's biggest companies are able to hide money in tax havens.
Is there a solution to the crisis?
No, because I don't think anything useful has come out of any of the policy reform discussions with respect to financial reform.
They give us answers we aren't always prepared for.
What are the chances that the report would make the Israeli authorities to review their policies towards the Palestinians?
Oh, probably zero.
This recession will be even worse than it was in 2008.
But that would be the nasty way for it to happen, But because of Guantanamo, the U.S. is no longer taking so many prisoners. So instead of taking prisoners, they kill people.
A lot of people think that he's now unelectable and a bad leader.
Wow, there's just so much information to take in.
Pay attention, there'll be a test on this later.
Taking notes.
Welcome to the show.
Wow, this is crazy. We're definitely talking sci-fi over here. From 20 years ago, people would never have believed this. Crazy times we're living in.
I'm still trying to wrap my head around this story. This is a fantastic story.
Yes, it is a fantastic story, and it's a worldwide problem.
Welcome to the party.
Fault Lines.
And we're back, and we are taking your calls. You're listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. The phone number is 202-521-1320, and you should get on the line if you want to talk to us. We have a couple folks we're about to go to, but we still have room for more. Again, 202-521-1320. Tarif calling in from New Orleans. Tarif, first up, almost as always, you're on the line. What's on your mind, man?
I think I might have hit a bee's nest or something. Before I go into my comment, important Julian signs out of whistleblowers. Okay. The story they had a Kentucky news station did a story on Clara Mitchell, WPSD Local 6. The reporter name is Shaw Mary Morrison. So they did it yesterday or the day before last. And how the way they placed it is when you look at the whole segment, it looks like it's part of misinformation or disinformation. How one reporter leads off by saying, yeah, they got a lot of misinformation out there dealing with COVID-19 and vaccines. Then the young lady named Cheryl Morrison going into her segment on that video and whatnot. Now, that person in the video is hard to get in contact with. Now, she wrote me back in Twitter saying that, yeah, she did try to contact her. She was unsuccessful. She tried to contact the hospitals and whatnot. And at the same time, I'm thinking to myself, you also got clinics and drug rehabs and nursing homes that have RNs. You have RNs that go around checking on patients. So it's more than just a day's search. You know, this is something serious. So, and she also...
Wait, Tarif, before you go, I just want to set this up for some folks. If they listen to us every day, they know what you're talking about. But you're talking about this video that you sent in with a nurse, Kalila Mitchell, who said that she got the vaccine and then developed Bell's palsy. And she's wearing a mask in the video. She's crying, and she's basically recommending that people not get the vaccine because it's what happened to her. Is she got the vaccine, and then shortly after, she started to suffer from facial paralysis. So that's the background. You then said yesterday when you called in that you had briefly been blocked from Twitter, I believe it was, over sharing the story, and they only let you back in when you unblocked the story. I'm just setting folks up for this. And now you're talking about a Kentucky newspaper where I believe it's Shamaria Morrison, who's a reporter, writer with that Kentucky newspaper, is writing about this story. And you say that you've been corresponding with that reporter, right?
Yeah, well, you know, it's like she corresponded. She wrote tweeted me back 4 times, and it was a news report on television. I saw the news report. I didn't agree with it because it was misleading. They put it in a section between one reporter talking about misinformation out there about vaccines. Then she did the segment with that woman. Then another part of it saying they had this Dr. Walter talking about, yeah, they got a lot of stuff out there with people talking about 5G and microchips, and you got these things out here on social media, this misinformation, disinformation. So when you look at it as a whole, it looked like the video of that woman speaking might be misinformation or disinformation. My thing is this: if this reporter or if this news station really want to do a good job, they can contact Knoxville, Tennessee, their news outlet down there, and they can run a news report on that video to see if anybody know that woman. Instead of just saying, well, we look for on in the hospitals, and then we couldn't get no information from the hospitals because they didn't want to confirm or deny she worked in the hospitals, or they look for the nurse registry.
I see what you're saying. Tarif, we've got a bunch of other callers. I do see what you're saying. We've got a bunch of other callers, so I want to go to them. But basically, they should do some due diligence, a little bit more due diligence, instead of just dismissing it. And I get what you're saying. It doesn't make sense. This is not the level of, it's not like, tantamount to people talking about 5G and microchips when it comes to the vaccine. I get what you're saying completely. Tarif, thank you for the call. We've got Ben calling in from Ohio. Ben, you're on the line. What's going on, man?
Hey, how are you? I just wanted to talk about the efficacy of the force the vote situation. So, I guess assuming that they're all rational actors in this chess game, essentially, I believe that Pelosi sort of already showed her hand by giving up the committee seat from AOC to Kathleen Rice. When Kathleen Rice said, well, I may not be inclined to vote for you if you don't do it. Because if she wasn't afraid of the second or third round, winning that popularity contest, then she is probably aware that if she is no longer speaker, that everyone else has the same odds of becoming speaker, like mathematically. And because everyone's self-interested, they're more likely to be inclined to advocate for themselves or their own constituency to get that spot, like, say, Katie Porter or Barbara Lee or whomever, that could actually replace her. So I think that's what they're trying to avoid, the sort of endless loop of, like the recursion algorithm of like, okay, this person doesn't get to 18, this next person needs to get to, and it just keeps going like that until one person emerges who is not Nancy Pelosi. That's what I think.
Interesting take. I like the language and the terms you're using, sort of a game theoretic approach. Jamarl, I'm going to turn it over to you. He started off with chess, and you follow this stuff pretty closely. What do you think there?
Maybe. So I will be very curious to know what's going on behind the scenes. Meaning, because it's very possible that Pelosi has a power base where it's this belief that there will be punishment if the person doesn't get the seat. Like, I got to be honest, I don't know the internal dynamics of what is going on behind the scenes. AOC was nice enough to engage in this. Meaning, you have many politicians who would completely ignore that the conversation was even taking place. She talked about it. She discussed it. She gave her reasons. And even though I disagree with her reasons as to why she doesn't think it's a good idea, I think the reasons probably go beyond those reasons into stuff that may take place behind the scenes. And power that is, let's say, used in this kind of soft power way where we don't get to see it, but it's definitely there in regards to the levers that can be used against her. I don't know. I mean, I just want lefties to get into this mindset where they realize that the beseeching, the begging, the being okay with and going along to get along has failed you. Even Dr. Bill Honigman, when he talks about it, I love the guy. But what did he say? We've been doing this for years, and we got 88% support. Think about what you've just said. You've got 88% support in regards to the public itself, and you still can't get it across. Do you really need to get 100% support before they give you any kind of credence on this? So that's the way I see it. You got to push. You got to, the leverage that you use. You can't just keep going in this kind of waiting, plotting thing. The force to vote thing should be used because it's the right thing to do from the standpoint of leverage and pushing. And if it's not Pelosi, I don't care who else it is. Whether or not these guys have stuff going on behind the scenes that is preventing them from doing it, I suspect it lies there and what they're not saying. But there's no way to know.
All right, let's go to the next caller. Anthony, thank you for the call, Ben. Anthony calling in from Detroit. Anthony, you're on the line. We've got to be quick here because we've got like 3 after you. So really, in about 20, 30, 40 seconds, what's on your mind, Anthony?
Real quick, hey, what's up, guys? Motor City checking in. I just wanted to speak on the Nikki Haley thing you guys brought up. I'll be quick. She absolutely is living in bizarro world. The idea that corporations will actually bend to the will of the public, unless it is, within their financial, best means to, or best interest to do so. Plenty of examples. If you look at movements where, when black people were finally put on TV, it wasn't because, they felt some moral duty of sense of rightness. It was because, hey, well, guess what? You want to reach this population of people and start selling your product, you better start advertising to them. When Nike starts co-opting Colin Kaepernick, it's not because, they feel some sense of obligation to the black people that make up the bulk of their, sales and everything. It's because it's finally, the tide has finally turned where it's in their best interest financially to do so.
Anthony, I agree with you. We've got a bunch of other calls, right. So I want to go to them. Thank you for the call. Fundamentally, I agree with you, but in a lot of cases, it is in their best interest because it's easy to do. They don't have to push for any fundamental changes. They don't have to give away millions of dollars. They don't have to change the structure of their corporations. They just have to say some things and film different types of ads. Anyway, we have Valerie calling in from Florida. Valerie, you're on the line. What's on your mind?
Yeah, hi, this is Mallory, not Valerie. So anyway, I wanted to say something about what the Dems are doing right now. My opinion is the Dems are most likely paid to lose. They're paid by the donors to lose these fights. Same thing back in the public option argument back in 2009, whenever we had a Democratic House and Senate and president in office. So I think that they're paid to lose. I think it's the only logical conclusion. Next thing I want to say is like I can't be a member of Progressive Democrats of America anymore. I listen to Bill Honigman. I have completely switched over to People's Party. I have let my PDA membership lapse. Last thing I want to say is I think that we should be talking about Social Security for all. We should be rebranding UBI as Social Security for all. I think that that's something that Americans can more easily understand, and it might be something that is worth exploring in the next few months. Thanks so much.
Interesting take. Thank you for the call, Mallory. Pardon me for getting your name wrong. We have BJ calling in from Florida. BJ, what's on your mind? You got about 30 seconds here.
Yeah, if you look into the whole vaccination thing in general, a lot of people are skeptical about that, not just because of obviously the Tuskegee experiments, but what America has a propensity to do with poor people. We still pay reparations out now to people who were a part of eugenics experiments. There's a book about Hitler and some of the ideas that he got from the United States. Geez Louise, the time for it. I'm sorry. In general, it talks about
BJ, please call in. We don't have enough time out, but we have one more caller and not enough time to take it. Please call in some other day when you have what you're looking for there. We have Will calling in from Chicago. Will, you're on the line in about 30 seconds. What is on your mind?
Hey guys, so people care about health outcomes. When pundits talk about left economic policies and right economic policies, it can frankly go over Americans' heads. I have a theory that unifies individual health as it carries over into social health, especially in the context of depression movements and collective action for collective good. All wins on the left have come from overcoming social anxiety, going outside and walking outside with friends. Thank you guys.
I like the take. In a broad sense, I like the take. Walking, yes, and working too. Working together. Anyway, we need to close out today's show. Quick note, we will be off the air this Friday. It is New Year's Day, but we're closing this one out. Thank you, everybody, for listening in. Thank you, Jamarl Thomas, my co-host. Thank you to producers Cameron and Raheem. Thank you, engineer Andre. And thank you, again, that is you, for listening to this show. We will be back tomorrow, folks. Have a great day. Signing off, Fault Lines, Thomas and Stranahan.
Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. Another one is in the record books. This is a really interesting show today. I want to give a shout out to Shane on this one, because I get into my own pet interests. I am a history buff. And so there's certain topics that I get really enamored with. And recently, I think I went through, I get into these reading benches. So, like I said, Berlin from Beaver, then you go to, Stalingrad, then it's like, hey, what happens after? Then you see Berlin, and then you say, okay, what happens before that? And then what happens before Stalin? What happens with the Russian Revolution? One thing kind of leads to the other. The thing that I got into that I was fascinated and curious about was the fall of the Soviet Union. It happens on Christmas. At the very least, the official part of it happens during Christmas, where all of these guys kind of go out. Gorbachev gives a quick message ending it all, even though they basically had made the agreement beforehand. Yeltsin was being a dick to Gorbachev for all of the stuff that had happened prior, but Gorbachev had did some pretty shady shit to Yeltsin early on. The interesting part, though, was that Gorbachev initiated all of these processes that he couldn't control. And that's the fascinating part. Think of it as, okay, I'm going to open up this country after 50, 60 years. And then you realize that one step necessitates another. And then you get to a point where you've taken so many steps that there is no way back. And the hardliners try to take power in a coup. And the moment, Yeltsin comes out and takes fighting back and everything else. And so it gives this impression that these guys are reformers, but Yeltsin is the reformer. And because Yeltsin was fighting on this aspect of nationalism, well, by definition of fighting on this aspect of nationalism, what does that mean in the context of the Soviet Union? And if Russia pulls itself out the Union, what is the rest? This fight was taking place in regards to nationalism in the context of the Soviet Union, with Yeltsin being this kind of lightning rod, with the other countries themselves trying to gain independence and basically dominance of their own domain. The book is fascinating and goes into Gorbachev's last day of office and does these callbacks. The problem is that the author of the book ignores some of the larger politics that was taking place in regards to the way the United States was instigating itself into the political affairs. Meaning, Bill Clinton running the campaign in order to get Yeltsin back in office after Yeltsin is basically demoralized, clearly in over his head, has no capacity to understand what is taking place in his economy or the politics, gets it monstrously wrong. Tens, hundreds of thousands of people die because of it. Like, they put through actions that they could no longer fundamentally control. And Yeltsin, who was doing a lot of the stuff seemingly for political grandstanding and for political power, well, he got the power, recognized, holy shit, that's right, I do have the power. And for this kind of upsmanship over Gorbachev and everything else, it's a fascinating book. In the West, it's also fascinating whereas the complicated relationship Gorbachev has with the rest of the world versus Russia. Like, if you unleash this stuff, and the public itself is not entirely understanding of what it means for the stuff to be unleashed, and then you end up in a shitty situation, because it was always going to be bad in any transition. I mean, Brexit, for example. Boris Johnson was right. We're pulling out of the European Union. It's going to be difficult when we make our transition. At some point, we'll be okay, but in the beginning, it's going to hurt. Well, the same thing was true for Glasnost and Perestroika. I don't know. It's a fascinating period, complicated, and even questions about whether or not you could ever do something like that without causing massive amounts of chaos. Either way, it didn't necessarily seem that they had a clear plan for it, especially Yeltsin didn't seem to have a clear plan. Gorbachev, at the very least, was trying to hold on to the reins on some level. Fascinating book. I guess my point is, it's shout out to Shane being cool with me exploring that stuff with the various people we could bring on. In this case, Mark Sleboda, who even lives in Moscow, which makes it that much more awesome. So shout out to Shane on that one. And shout out to Mark for coming on and having the conversation. Guys, all right, I'm going to end this. I'm going to say like, I'm going to say share, I'm going to say subscribe. You may see me a little bit later. I've been trying to have a slow week, considering this is the Christmas holiday. Yesterday, I got really pissed off, so I came down and did the news. But we'll see. You might see me later on today. I'm going to say like, I'm going to say share, I'm going to say subscribe, and wait a minute, we have a comment. All right, we have a comment. Let's go to the comment first. And come on. Sports droppings. Jake is not a sucker. He's control opposition. By the way, Katzenberg's cash. They bought his silence over Warren's back channeling with Hillary. See, I don't know. I mean, look, I think that these guys have a point of view of the world. And Cenk and Warren is Cenk's type. Warren is Cenk's type of politician. She came on the show. They could schmooze. I think that's the way that goes. Now, the money that he gets from Katzenberg is possible. I mean, Cenk likes to make the argument that basically politicians are bought, and that the problem with our political system is that people get all sorts of cash, and then they shut up. They do incrementalism for that cash, or for the most part, they give their favors over, they give their political instincts and the political best interests that should go to the American public, to basically the people that are buying them, the interests. You have dollars or pitchforks. There haven't been pitchforks for a while, so the only thing you have is dollars running the day. Now, I believe that. I think that's true. I think that if 90% of the races are won by the side with the most cash, it is the most obvious thing in the world for the politician to lean to the side of the cash. Because even if you say, all right, I'm going to do this incremental stuff as long as they get the cash, I have a 9-to-1 chance of winning. Why is that not true for something like the Young Turks? If you get a bunch of money from a Democratic donor who's giving, $20 million, why do we believe that one has influence but the other doesn't? Just because you call it an investment, I can call the money that they give to Joe Biden an investment. It doesn't necessarily mean it doesn't have effects on his point of view and the way he goes about his conversation. So I get that. I understand that. But it's hard to know whether it's that or whether that's just his point of view. I mean, is it a situation where their point of view changed? Is it possible that Cenk would just believe the Russiagate stuff because he believes it? That he hates Trump just as much as the Democrats hate Trump? I guess I'm saying I don't know. I'm saying I think it's a little dodgy for Cenk to make that argument so hard, the politicians, but the money doesn't necessarily bother. But beyond that point, I mean, you don't even have to go to the Katzenberg stuff. I mean, the question becomes, if you're wrong, you're wrong. And whether he was inspired to be wrong or whether he was just wrong, I don't necessarily think it matters. The backing Warren as if she was somehow some kind of similar component to Sanders was just wrong and, yeah, stupid. He was a sucker. And this idea that Russiagate, he believed all of this stuff, even as the planks started falling apart and it became clear that this was a conspiracy theory. Wrong. He was a sucker. And when it comes to this notion that he and the left and somehow the Democratic base, I would point to you again, the base, are the people who are in the room when Hillary Clinton is basically giving those speeches, or in the room where Biden is telling him that nothing is fundamental to change. They and the audience are just the suckers that vote for him. There's a difference in those things. So, yeah, I mean, what do you want to call it? Sucker or controlled opposition? I don't know. I don't know his intentions. I don't know what's pushing behind him. I just know that on multiple scenarios, multiple cases, he and that network was fundamentally wrong. And it's anti-politics. It's not politics where you use leverage, where you use, where you recognize that these guys are not on your side, where you recognize that you being on the outs and being willing to be on the outs and being willing to withdraw support, that unconditional support basically allows them to take advantage of you. In fact, it incentivizes them to take advantage of you. You heard Dr. Bill. All of these things that are pulling on politicians, they get $1 billion. You think that $1 billion goes for free? That money is an investment. All of these entanglements. And then you have blacks and you have lefties, both of which are terrified of Republicans, both of which are willing to give support unconditionally. Just because you rattle and shake on your show after the fact doesn't really matter. I'm talking about the ability to say you will not get unconditional support. The ability to stand in an enclave, to be on your channel and say that if you want our support, the 20 million people or whatever that watch us, that pay attention to us, if you want that support, you back the interests of the American public, and that public interest is Medicare for all. That's how you do politics. The belly aching on the show after you told the people to support the Democrats is nonsense. Oh, we're going to have a protest march after you've given all of your unconditional support. Okay, go waste your time in the march. They don't care. You've already given them everything that they wanted. Anything after the fact is worthless. But sports droppings, I feel you. Fair enough. I'm going to say like, I'm going to say share, and I'm going to say subscribe. Thanks, everyone. I'll maybe see you today. Maybe. We'll see. Thanks all.